When Clara Whitmore opened the morning newspaper on that frozen January day in 1845, she didn't know her world was about to collapse. There, in bold print among the society announcements, was the name of the man she loved, Adrian Locke, Earl of Ashworth, engaged to Lady Catherine Pemberton, heiress to a banking fortune. The same man who had whispered promises of marriage just 3 nights before. The same man who had sworn to defy his family for her. He had chosen money over love, status over truth, and in doing so, he had made the worst mistake of his life. Stay with us until the very end to see how Clara's journey transforms her from a heartbroken merchant's daughter into a force that would shake the foundations of London's aristocracy. If you're watching from London, New York, Paris, or anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below and hit that like button. The Whitmore townhouse on Belgrave Square had never felt so cold. Clara sat perfectly still in the breakfast room, the newspaper trembling in her hands. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny, mocking witnesses to her destruction. The words on the page blurred, then sharpened, then blurred again as her eyes refused to accept what they were seeing. Lord Adrian Locke, Earl of Ashworth, is pleased to announce his engagement to Lady Catherine Pemberton, daughter of the Duke of Moreland. The wedding is planned for the spring season at Westminster Abbey. Clara? Her mother's voice seemed to come from very far away. Darling, you've gone quite pale. What is it? Clara couldn't speak. Her throat had closed completely, as if her body was trying to protect her from having to voice the truth aloud. She simply handed the newspaper to her mother and watched as Elizabeth Whitmore's face transformed from concern to horror.
"Oh, my dear girl." Her mother's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, Clara." "I don't understand." The words finally came, barely more than a whisper. "He was here. 3 nights ago, he was right here in our garden. He told me." Her voice cracked. "Told me he loved me. He said his family could go to the devil, that he would marry me regardless of what they wanted." Elizabeth set down the newspaper with shaking hands. Men of his station say many things they don't mean, especially to young women who don't. Clara stood so abruptly her chair scraped against the floor. "Don't tell me I was foolish to believe him. Don't tell me I should have known better. That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean, Mother?" Clara's voice rose, all the carefully cultivated composure she'd been taught since childhood evaporating. "That I should have expected this? That a merchant's daughter should never have trusted an earl's promises? That I was reaching above my station? Clara, please. He gave me this." Clara yanked a delicate silver locket from beneath her dress. "He said it belonged to his grandmother. He said I should wear it always, that soon I would have the right to wear the Ashworth jewels openly." Was that a lie too? Her mother's silence was answer enough. The sound that emerged from Clara's throat was something between a laugh and a sob. She pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to contain the grief that threatened to tear her apart from the inside. For 6 months, she had believed in Adrian Locke. She had believed in his promises, his declarations, his plans for their future together. She had let him kiss her in moonlit gardens, had written him letters filled with her hopes and dreams, had imagined the life they would build together. And all of it, every whispered word, every stolen moment, every promise, had been a lie. "I need to be alone." Clara moved toward the door, her movements stiff and mechanical. "Clara, wait!" But she was already gone, fleeing up the stairs to her bedroom where she could finally let herself shatter. The next 3 days passed in a fog of humiliation and grief. The news of Adrian's engagement spread through London society like wildfire, and with it came the inevitable gossip about Clara Whitmore, the merchant's daughter who had foolishly believed an earl would marry beneath him. The whispers followed her family everywhere, in the shops along Bond Street, at the theater, even at church. Poor deluded girl. What did she expect, really? These merchant families, always grasping above their station. I heard she practically threw herself at him. Clara's father, Thomas Whitmore, was a successful textile merchant with connections throughout Europe and a fortune that rivaled many aristocratic families. But money, as Clara was learning with brutal clarity, could not buy acceptance into the world that mattered to people like Adrian Locke. On the 4th day, a letter arrived. Clara recognized Adrian's handwriting immediately. Her hand shook as she broke the seal,
some desperate part of her still hoping for an explanation, an apology, something that would make sense of the senseless. My dear Clara, I hope you will understand that my decision was made out of necessity rather than choice. My family's estate requires immediate financial intervention, and Lady Catherine's dowry will secure not only my inheritance, but the livelihoods of hundreds of people who depend on Ashworth lands. I have a duty to my name and my legacy that supersedes personal feelings. I trust you will conduct yourself with discretion regarding our past acquaintance. It would be most unfortunate if rumors were to circulate that might embarrass either of our families. I wish you every happiness in your future endeavors. Yours, A. Locke. Clara read the letter 3 times, each reading stoking a different emotion. First came the pain, sharp and overwhelming. Then came disbelief at his audacity. And finally, burning through everything else, came rage. Discretion, she said aloud to her empty room. He wants discretion. She walked to her writing desk and pulled out a box she'd hidden in the bottom drawer. Inside were all of Adrian's letters to her, dozens of them, filled with passionate declarations and detailed plans for their elopement if his family refused to accept their marriage. Letters in which he'd called her his brightest star, his dearest heart, his future countess. Letters that now proved him a liar and a coward. Clara's first instinct was to publish them, to expose him for the fraud he was. But as she sat with the letters spread before her, a different kind of anger began to crystallize. Publishing the letters would only confirm what society already believed, that she was a scorned woman grasping for revenge, that she was emotional and irrational, that she deserved her humiliation. No, she would not give them that satisfaction. Instead, Clara carefully returned the letters to their box and locked it away. Then she sat down and wrote a single response to Adrian's letter. Lord Ashworth, your letter has been received and noted. I will conduct myself with the same level of honor and integrity you have demonstrated throughout our acquaintance. You need not concern yourself with my happiness or my future endeavors. I assure you, both will far exceed anything you could wish for me. Miss C. Whitmore. She sealed it with wax and sent it before she could reconsider. It wasn't revenge, not yet, but it was a promise to herself that she would not disappear quietly into the shame and obscurity he expected. 3 weeks after the announcement, Clara attended her first social event since the scandal broke. It was a small evening reception at the home of Lady Margaret Hartwell, a distant cousin of her mother's who had shown the family unexpected kindness. Clara knew it would be torture, but she also knew that hiding would only confirm what everyone was already saying about her. The moment she entered the drawing room, conversation stopped. Clara felt every eye in the room turned toward her. She heard the whispers, saw the raised eyebrows, felt the weight of judgment pressing down on her from all sides. For one terrible moment, she wanted to turn and run. But then she remembered Adrian's letter, his assumption that she would quietly accept her humiliation, that she would slink away and make herself small and invisible to avoid embarrassing him. She lifted her chin and walked into the room. Miss Whitmore, Lady Hartwell swept toward her with genuine warmth. How lovely to see you. Come, let me introduce you to some friends who've been most eager to make your acquaintance. The evening was every bit as difficult as Clara had anticipated. She endured countless pitying looks, overheard at least 3 cruel comments whispered just loud enough for her to hear, and suffered through a conversation with Mrs. Pemberton, Lady Catherine's mother, who made several pointed remarks about the importance of understanding one's proper place in society. But Clara smiled. She was gracious. She discussed literature, art, and current affairs with an eloquence that surprised those who had dismissed her as nothing more than a heartbroken girl. She refused to give them the spectacle of her pain. It was near the end of the evening when it happened. Clara had stepped onto the terrace for a moment of solitude when she heard voices from the garden below. Male voices, laughing and boasting after too much brandy. Absolutely absurd that Locke had to write her a letter explaining himself, one voice said, as if she had any claim on him. I heard she was quite persistent, another voice added, following him about town, writing him desperate letters. Gentlemen, really, a third voice, cultured and sharp with disapproval. This is beneath even drunk gossip. Oh, come now, Ashcroft, you can't tell me you're not amused by the whole affair. Ashcroft. Clara's hands gripped the terrace railing. That would be Duke Julian Ashcroft, one of the most powerful men in England and a close friend of Adrian's family. Amused, the Duke's voice carried a dangerous edge, by a man breaking his promises to a young woman and then expecting congratulations for it? No, gentlemen, I find nothing amusing in watching Locke prove himself a coward. Silence fell in the garden below. Careful, Ashcroft, the first voice said, less jovial now. Locke is your friend. Locke is a fool, the Duke replied coldly, and Miss Whitmore is well rid of him, though I doubt she sees it that way yet. Clara's breath caught. She hadn't expected anyone, especially not someone of Julian Ashcroft's standing, to speak in her defense. The girl is nothing, the second voice protested. A merchant's daughter with pretensions. The girl, the Duke interrupted, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet, has more courage in facing this room tonight than all of you combined. Now, if you'll excuse me, I find I've had enough of this conversation and this company. Clara heard footsteps crunching on gravel, then silence. She stood frozen on the terrace, her heart pounding, trying to process what she'd just heard. She had never met Duke Julian Ashcroft, though she knew his reputation. He was 32 years old, unmarried, and famously particular about his company. He controlled vast estates across England, held influence in Parliament, and was related to half the aristocratic families in Europe. He was also known for his sharp intelligence, his intolerance for fools, and his complete disinterest in the marriage market that had consumed every other eligible nobleman, and he had just defended her to his peers. Clara didn't know what to make of it. She only knew that in the 3 weeks since her world had collapsed, those few words from a stranger had been the first kindness from anyone outside her immediate family. She wiped at her eyes, straightened her shoulders, and went back inside to finish the evening. The next morning, a letter arrived at the Whitmore residence. It was delivered by a liveried servant bearing the Ashcroft family crest and addressed to Miss Clara Whitmore in elegant script. Clara stared at it for a full minute before breaking the seal. Miss Whitmore, please forgive the presumption of this correspondence. We have not been formally introduced, but after overhearing certain conversations last evening, I felt compelled to write. I was a friend of your father's late brother, Robert, during our time at Oxford. He spoke often of his family, including a niece who showed remarkable promise in mathematics and literature. I assume that was you. If you are amenable, I would be honored to call upon your family tomorrow afternoon. I have some business matters to discuss with your father, and I believe you might find our conversation of interest as well. Respectfully, Julian Ashcroft. Clara read the letter twice, her mind racing. The mention of her Uncle Robert was clearly a polite fiction. Uncle Robert had died when she was 10 years old, but the reference gave the Duke a legitimate excuse for making contact. But why would Julian Ashcroft want to call on her family? Clara? Her mother appeared in the doorway. Is everything all right? Clara handed her the letter. Elizabeth Whitmore's eyes widened as she read. The Duke of Ashcroft wants to call on us? But why? I have no idea. Clara moved to the window, looking out at the garden where Adrian had once promised her the world. But I intend to find out. Duke Julian Ashcroft arrived precisely at 3 o'clock the following afternoon. Clara watched from the upstairs window as his carriage pulled up to the house, a magnificent black vehicle drawn by 4 matched horses and bearing the Ashcroft coat of arms. A footman rushed to open the door, and the Duke emerged. He was tall and lean, dressed in impeccably tailored dark clothing that spoke of wealth without ostentation. His dark hair was touched with gray at the temples, and even from a distance, Clara could see the sharp intelligence in his features. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who had never questioned his place in the world. Clara took a deep breath and went downstairs. She found her parents already in the drawing room, her father looking bemused and her mother nervously adjusting the tea service. They all stood as the butler announced their guest. Your Grace, Thomas Whitmore bowed. You honor our home. Mr. Whitmore, Mrs. Whitmore. Julian's voice was deep and cultured, with a subtle warmth that surprised Clara. Then his eyes found her, and something shifted in his expression. And you must be Miss Whitmore. Your Grace, Clara curtsied, meeting his gaze directly. For a moment they simply looked at each other. Julian's eyes were a startling gray, intelligent and assessing. Clara had the distinct impression that he was seeing far more than she was showing. Please sit. Elizabeth gestured to the chairs. We're honored by your visit, though I confess we were somewhat surprised by it. Julian settled into his seat with easy grace.
As I mentioned in my letter, I was a friend of Robert Whitmore's. But I'll be honest with you all, that's not the only reason I'm here. Thomas frowned. Then what brings you to our door, Your Grace? Julian was quiet for a moment, as if considering his words carefully. Then he looked directly at Clara.
I overheard a conversation at Lady Hartwell's reception that I found deeply troubling. Gentlemen of my acquaintance were discussing Miss Whitmore in terms that I can only describe as disrespectful and unjust. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she didn't look away. Your Grace, Thomas began, his voice tight, if this is about the situation with Lord Ashworth, it is, in a manner of speaking. Julian's expression hardened. I've known Adrian Locke since we were boys at Eton. He is charming, witty, and utterly without moral backbone. What he did to your daughter was contemptible, and the fact that society has chosen to blame her for his cowardice is an indictment of everything wrong with our class. Silence fell over the room. Why are you telling us this? Clara heard herself ask. Julian turned his full attention to her, and Clara felt the force of that gaze like a physical thing. Because I believe in speaking truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Because I'm tired of watching good people destroyed by the pettiness and cruelty of my peers, and because... He paused, a slight smile touching his lips. Because I have the power to do something about it, and I've decided it's past time I used that power for something worthwhile. I don't understand, Elizabeth said quietly. Mrs. Whitmore, your daughter attended one social event in 3 weeks and conducted herself with more grace and dignity than most of the people in that room could manage in a lifetime. She was subjected to gossip, judgment, and outright cruelty, and she held her head high. That takes extraordinary strength. He looked back at Clara. I would like to help repair the damage that's been done to your reputation, Miss Whitmore. Not because I pity you, but because I respect you, and because allowing Adrian Locke's version of events to stand unchallenged offends my sense of justice. Clara's heart was pounding. How? By making it clear that not everyone in society shares the prevailing opinion of your supposed transgression. By extending invitations to you and your family for events where my presence carries weight. By demonstrating that the Duke of Ashcroft considers the Whitmores worthy of his time and attention. He said it matter-of-factly, as if he wasn't offering to completely alter Clara's social standing with a few strategic appearances. Your Grace, Thomas said carefully, that's extraordinarily generous, but we must consider the implications. Your association with our family, given the recent scandal, could damage your own reputation. Julian's smile turned sharp. Mr. Whitmore, I am the Duke of Ashcroft. I control estates in 6 counties, have the ear of half of Parliament, and am related by blood or marriage to most of the ruling families in Europe. My reputation is quite secure, I assure you. The question is whether Miss Whitmore is willing to endure the additional scrutiny that would come from being seen in my company. All eyes turned to Clara. She thought about Adrian's letter, about his assumption that she would quietly disappear. She thought about the whispers at Lady Hartwell's reception, the pitying looks, the barely concealed glee of those who enjoyed watching her humiliation. She thought about the years ahead, years of being known as the foolish girl who had reached above her station and gotten exactly what she deserved. Then she thought about Julian Ashcroft defending her to his peers in a darkened garden, speaking truth when no one else would. I accept your offer, Your Grace, Clara said quietly, with gratitude. Something flickered in Julian's eyes. Approval, perhaps? Or respect? Excellent. Then I'll send word about a dinner party I'm hosting next week. I believe it's time London society met the real Clara Whitmore, not the caricature they've created. He stood, and the Whitmores rose with him. One more thing, Julian said as the butler appeared to show him out. Miss Whitmore, I understand you're interested in literature and mathematics. Clara blinked at the change of subject. Yes, Your Grace. I have an extensive library at Ashcroft House. You're welcome to visit it anytime. I think you'll find the mathematics section particularly interesting. I have several rare texts on probability theory and geometric analysis. And with that, he was gone, leaving the Whitmore family staring at each other in stunned silence. What, Elizabeth finally said, just happened? Clara sank into her chair, her mind reeling. She had no idea what Julian Ashcroft's true motives were, or why a duke would involve himself in the troubles of a merchant's daughter. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Her life had just changed again. And this time, she was determined to meet that change on her own terms, with her eyes wide open and her heart carefully guarded. The girl who had trusted Adrian Locke's promises was gone, shattered beyond repair on that cold January morning. But the woman who would rise from those ashes was just beginning to understand her own strength. And London society had no idea what was coming. The week between Julian's visit and his dinner party felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, waiting to either fly or fall. Clara spent those days in a state of controlled tension, acutely aware that she was about to step back into the very world that had spent the past month tearing her apart. But this time would be different. This time, she would walk in under the protection of one of the most powerful men in England. The question that kept her awake at night was simple. Why? "He's using you," her cousin Margaret said bluntly over tea on the third day. Margaret was the only family member close to Clara's age, a sharp-tongued woman of 25 who had survived her own social disasters. "Men like the Duke of Ashcroft don't do favors out of kindness. There's always an angle." "Then what's his angle?" Clara asked, genuinely curious. Margaret shrugged. "Perhaps he wants to irritate Adrian Locke's family. Perhaps he's bored and you're an interesting diversion. Perhaps he actually believes what he said about justice." She gave Clara a pointed look. "But whatever his reasons, you'd be a fool to trust him with your heart." "My heart isn't available for trust," Clara said quietly. "Not anymore." "Good." Margaret set down her teacup with a decisive clink. "Then use this opportunity for what it is. A chance to rebuild your reputation and show society that Clara Whitmore is nobody's victim." On the morning of the dinner party, a package arrived from Ashcroft House. Inside was a note in Julian's distinctive hand and a small velvet box. "Miss Whitmore, please accept this as a loan for this evening. It belonged to my grandmother, who would have appreciated your spirit. J." Clara opened the box and gasped. Nestled against black velvet was a stunning sapphire pendant surrounded by diamonds, hanging from a delicate silver chain. It was worth more than her father earned in a year. "He sent you the Ashcroft sapphire," her mother breathed, appearing at Clara's shoulder. "Clara, that piece has been in his family for 200 years. It's never been worn by anyone outside the Ashcroft bloodline." Clara stared at the jewel, her mind racing. This wasn't just a loan of jewelry. This was a statement, a declaration that would be impossible for society to ignore. Anyone who saw her wearing the Ashcroft sapphire would understand immediately that the Duke considered her worthy of his family's treasures. It was also exactly the kind of bold move that would cause an absolute scandal. "Are you going to wear it?" her mother asked quietly. Clara thought about Adrian's cheap locket, still locked away in her drawer. She thought about his engagement to Lady Catherine, announced in the papers like a business transaction. She thought about every whispered insult, every pitying look, every assumption that she would simply fade away into embarrassed obscurity. "Yes," she said. I am." That evening, as Clara's maid fastened the sapphire around her neck, she looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her dress was a deep midnight blue that made the jewel seem to glow against her skin. Her dark hair was arranged in an elegant style that emphasized her long neck and the strength in her features. She looked like someone who belonged at a duke's table. She looked like someone who refused to be broken. The carriage ride to Ashcroft House felt simultaneously endless and far too short. Clara's parents sat across from her, both nervous in their own ways. Her father kept adjusting his cravat, while her mother couldn't stop fidgeting with her gloves. "Remember," Thomas said as the massive house came into view, "we're here as the Duke's guests. We have every right to hold our heads high." Clara nodded, but her stomach was churning. Through the carriage window, she could see other vehicles arriving. Disgorging, elegantly dressed aristocrats who probably had no idea that a merchant family would be joining them this evening. The scandal was about to get so much worse. Ashcroft House was magnificent, a sprawling Georgian mansion set back from the street by a circular drive and iron gates. Lights blazed from every window, and Clara could hear music drifting from inside as they approached the entrance. A butler greeted them at the door with no trace of judgment or surprise, as if the Whitmores attended ducal dinner parties every week. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, Miss Whitmore. His Grace is expecting you. Please follow me." They were led through a marble-floored entrance hall hung with portraits of Ashcroft ancestors, their painted eyes seeming to follow Clara as she passed. The butler brought them to a receiving room where other guests were gathered with pre-dinner drinks. Conversation stopped the moment they entered. Clara felt the weight of every stare, saw recognition flash across multiple faces as people registered who she was. The merchant's daughter, the girl Adrian Locke had humiliated, and she was wearing the Ashcroft sapphire. "Miss Whitmore!" Julian's voice cut through the shocked silence like a blade. He materialized at her side with the fluid grace of a predator, his hand extended. "I'm delighted you could join us." Clara placed her hand in his, acutely aware of every eye in the room watching them. "Thank you for the invitation, Your Grace, and for the loan of such a beautiful piece." His eyes lingered on the sapphire at her throat, and something that might have been approval flickered across his face. "It suits you far better than it ever did sitting in a vault." He raised his voice slightly, ensuring everyone could hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I present Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Whitmore and their daughter, Miss Clara Whitmore. The Whitmores are dear friends, and I expect you all to make them feel welcome." It was a command, not a request, and because Julian Ashcroft commanded it, the assembled aristocrats had no choice but to comply. A woman in an elaborate purple gown approached first, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Miss Whitmore, how lovely to meet you. I'm the Countess of Bedford. That's quite a stunning necklace." "The Duke was very generous to loan it to me," Clara said evenly. "Indeed." The Countess's gaze was sharp with curiosity and calculation. "I don't believe I've seen it worn in public before." "My grandmother wore it on her wedding day," Julian said smoothly, appearing at Clara's elbow with a glass of wine. "And at every major state dinner for 40 years. She always said it should be worn by women of substance and character, not locked away gathering dust." The implication was clear, and the Countess's smile turned brittle. "How progressive of you, Your Grace." More guests approached, drawn by curiosity and the desire to curry favor with their host. Clara endured questions that ranged from politely invasive to outright rude, all while maintaining the composure she'd built like armor over the past month. Julian remained close, subtly guiding conversations away from dangerous territory and making it clear through gesture and tone that insults to Clara would be taken as insults to him. Then she heard a voice that made her blood run cold. "Ashcroft, old friend, I didn't realize you were hosting tonight, or Catherine and I would have arrived earlier." Adrian Locke stood in the doorway, his fiancée on his arm. Lady Catherine Pemberton was everything Clara wasn't. Blonde, aristocratic, born into the world that Adrian had chosen over love. She was also, Clara noted with detached observation, clearly miserable despite her fixed smile. Julian's expression didn't change, but Clara felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees. "Locke," Julian said, his voice perfectly neutral. "Lady Catherine, what an unexpected surprise." Adrian's smile faltered slightly. "You did invite me, didn't you? Last month you mentioned—" "Ah, yes, that was before certain events came to my attention that made me reconsider the guest list." Julian's tone remained pleasant, but there was steel underneath. "However, you're here now. Do come in." Adrian's eyes swept the room and landed on Clara. She watched the color drain from his face as he registered her presence, the Ashcroft sapphire at her throat, and Julian standing protectively at her side. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice strangled. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Clearly," Clara replied, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. "Good evening, Lord Ashworth. Lady Catherine." Lady Catherine's gaze moved between Clara and Adrian, and understanding dawned in her eyes. "You're the merchant girl," she said flatly. It wasn't a question. The room went silent again, everyone straining to hear what would happen next. "I'm Clara Whitmore," Clara said, lifting her chin. "Daughter of Thomas Whitmore, one of the most successful textile merchants in England, and guest of the Duke of Ashcroft." "How democratic," Lady Catherine said with a brittle laugh. "I suppose the Duke is experimenting with expanding his social circle beyond the usual circles." "The Duke," Julian said coldly, "is experimenting with surrounding himself with people of actual worth, rather than those who simply inherited a title and assumed that made them superior." The insult landed like a slap. Lady Catherine's face flushed red, while Adrian looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him. "Now then," Julian continued, his voice returning to its pleasant social register as if nothing had happened. "Shall we proceed to dinner? I believe the first course is ready." The dining room was magnificent, a long table set with crystal and silver, candles casting warm light over everything. Clara found herself seated to Julian's right, a position of honor that would have been reserved for the highest-ranking lady present. It was a deliberate choice that sent yet another message about where Clara stood in the Duke's estimation. Adrian and Lady Catherine were seated near the far end of the table, where they couldn't easily participate in the main conversation. Clara tried not to take satisfaction in their obvious discomfort, but she was only human. Dinner proceeded with multiple courses and even more complicated social maneuvering. Clara found herself engaged in conversation with a baroness who was surprisingly kind, a retired general who shared her interest in mathematics, and a young viscountess who seemed genuinely curious about her father's business. But she was constantly aware of Adrian at the far end of the table, his jaw tight with tension, and of Lady Catherine, who drank more wine than was strictly proper, and whose laugh grew increasingly sharp as the evening wore on. It was during the fourth course that disaster struck. "Tell me, Miss Whitmore," Lady Catherine called down the table, her words slightly slurred, "do you often find yourself wearing jewelry that doesn't belong to you?" The conversations around the table stuttered to a halt. Clara set down her fork carefully. "I'm wearing a piece the Duke kindly loaned to me for the evening, Lady Catherine. As he mentioned earlier, it belonged to his grandmother." "How intimate," Lady Catherine said, her smile venomous. "One might almost think there was an understanding between you and his grace. Though I suppose you're used to misunderstanding the intentions of noblemen, aren't you?" "Catherine," Adrian hissed, grabbing her arm. "Stop." She shook him off. "Why? Everyone's thinking it." The poor merchant girl who thought an earl would actually marry her, now setting her sights on a duke. It's almost admirable, really, the ambition required to keep reaching above one's station despite repeated humiliation. Clara felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. Around the table, guests shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to be scandalized or entertained. "That's enough!" Julian's voice cut through the room like a whip. He stood slowly, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Lady Catherine, you will apologize to Miss Whitmore immediately, or you and Locke will leave my house." "Apologize?" Lady Catherine laughed shrilly. "For speaking the truth? Everyone knows what she is. A desperate social climber who has shown more grace under pressure than you're capable of imagining," Julian interrupted, his voice deadly quiet. "Who has endured public humiliation with dignity while you sit there drunk and vicious, lashing out at someone who has done nothing to you." He turned his gaze to Adrian, who had gone pale. "And you broke your promises to this woman, announced your engagement to another in a public newspaper, and then had the audacity to ask her for discretion. You lack the courage to defend her now, just as you lacked the courage to defend your promises then." Adrian's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. "Your Grace," the Countess of Bedford said quietly, "perhaps we should—" "No." Julian's attention returned to Lady Catherine. "You have insulted a guest in my home, Lady Catherine, a guest I specifically chose to honor. That makes your insult an insult to me. You will apologize or you will leave." Lady Catherine stared at him, her face mottled with anger and humiliation. For a long moment, Clara thought she might actually apologize. Instead, she stood abruptly, swaying slightly. "Come, Adrian," she snapped. "We're leaving. I won't sit here and watch this. This merchant's daughter parade around in jewels she has no right to wear." Adrian looked between Lady Catherine and Julian, clearly torn. Then his gaze landed on Clara, and something like regret flickered across his face. "Catherine is unwell," he said quietly. "Perhaps it would be best if we took our leave." "Perhaps it would," Julian agreed, his voice like ice. Clara watched them go, Adrian supporting his drunken fiancé, their exit witnessed by every scandalized guest in the room. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, she just felt tired. The moment they were gone, Julian turned to the table. "My apologies for that unpleasant scene. Let's continue with dinner, shall we?" Conversation resumed, though it was more subdued now. Claire pushed food around her plate, no longer hungry. She could feel people watching her, could hear whispers starting up again. This evening had been meant to help her reputation, but instead it had created an even bigger scandal. "Miss Whitmore," Julian said quietly, leaning toward her, "would you care to step outside for some air? You look rather pale." She nodded gratefully, allowing him to escort her from the dining room onto a terrace overlooking the gardens. The cool night air was a relief after the oppressive atmosphere inside. "I'm sorry," Clara said once they were alone. "I've ruined your dinner party." "You've ruined nothing," Julian said firmly. "Lady Catherine's behavior was inexcusable, and Adrian's cowardice continues to astound me." Clara laughed, the sound brittle. "This was supposed to help my reputation. Instead, tomorrow all of London will be talking about the merchant girl who drove Lady Catherine to hysterics at the Duke of Ashcroft's table." "Let them talk." Julian moved to stand beside her at the railing, his shoulder nearly touching hers. "Do you know what they'll also be talking about?" "What?" "The fact that I threw Adrian Locke out of my house for insulting you. The fact that I gave you the Ashcroft sapphire to wear. The fact that I seated you in the place of honor at my table." He turned to face her fully. "Clara, I didn't invite you here to quietly rehabilitate your reputation. I invited you here to make a statement." "What statement?" she asked, her heart pounding. "That anyone who insults you insults me. That I consider you worthy of respect regardless of your birth or the lies Adrian Locke told about you. That if London society wants to maintain any connection to the Duke of Ashcroft, they'd better learn to treat Clara Whitmore with the dignity she deserves." Clara stared at him, stunned. "Why? Why would you risk your own standing for someone you barely know?" Julian was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes searching her face in the moonlight. "Because the first time I saw you, you were standing alone in a room full of people who wanted to watch you break. And instead of breaking, you smiled. You were gracious to those who pitied you and polite to those who scorned you. You refused to give them the satisfaction of your tears." He paused. "That kind of strength is rare, Clara. And I've spent too many years surrounded by weak people hiding behind titles they didn't earn. I'm tired of it." "I'm not strong," Clara whispered. "I'm barely holding myself together." "Strength isn't the absence of pain," Julian said softly. "It's the refusal to let pain define you. You've been hurt, humiliated, and betrayed, and yet here you are, wearing my grandmother's sapphire and facing down the same society that tried to destroy you. That's strength, Clara. Real strength." She didn't know what to say to that, didn't know how to process the fact that this powerful, intimidating man saw something in her worth defending. "Come back inside," Julian said, offering his arm. "We'll finish dinner, serve the brandy, and send everyone home with enough to gossip about for weeks. And tomorrow, we'll start rebuilding your life on your terms, not theirs." Clara took his arm, drawing strength from his certainty. As they walked back into the dining room together, she felt something shift inside her. The grief and humiliation that had consumed her for weeks was still there, but it was no longer the only thing she felt. For the first time since that terrible morning with the newspaper, Clara felt something else stirring in her chest. Rage. Pure, clarifying rage at everyone who had tried to make her disappear. And beneath the rage, something harder and sharper. Determination. Adrian Locke had broken her heart, but Julian Ashcroft had shown her something more valuable than romance. He'd shown her that she didn't need to be loved or accepted by society to survive. She just needed to be strong enough to build her own damn life. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. When the guests finally began to depart, each one made a point of saying farewell to Clara with varying degrees of sincerity. The Countess of Bedford surprisingly clasped Clara's hand and whispered, "You handled that beautifully, my dear. Catherine made a fool of herself, not you." As the Whitmore family prepared to leave, Julian pulled Clara aside one more time. "I'm hosting a ball in 3 weeks," he said. "A major event. Half of London society will be there. I want you to attend as my special guest." Clara's eyes widened. "Your Grace, after tonight?" "After tonight, everyone knows exactly where I stand. The question is whether you're brave enough to stand there with me." It was a challenge, Clara realized. A test to see if she really possessed the strength he claimed to see in her. She thought about Margaret's warning not to trust him with her heart. She thought about the scandal this would cause, the gossip, the judgment. She thought about all the safe, quiet ways she could rebuild her life away from the spotlight. Then she thought about Lady Catherine's sneering face, about Adrian's cowardice, about every person who had expected her to disappear in shame. "I'll need a new dress," Clara said. Julian's smile was sharp and approving. "I know an excellent dressmaker. I'll have her contact you tomorrow." As Clara's carriage pulled away from Ashcroft House, she looked back at the glowing windows and the imposing figure of the Duke silhouetted in the doorway. She had stepped into his world tonight, and there would be no going back. But she was done being a victim of other people's choices. From now on, Clara Whitmore would make her own choices. And London society would simply have to learn to live with them. The scandal exploded across London society like a powder keg touched by flame. By noon the following day, 3 different versions of the dinner party incident had circulated through every drawing room, gentleman's club, and society household in the city. In one version, Clara had deliberately provoked Lady Catherine. In another, Julian had publicly declared romantic intentions toward the merchant's daughter. In the most salacious version, which spread the fastest, Clara was already the Duke's mistress, and the Ashcroft sapphire had been payment for services rendered. Clara learned of this last rumor from her mother, who had heard it from their housekeeper, who had heard it from the fishmonger's wife that morning. "They're calling you his kept woman," Elizabeth said, her voice shaking with fury and fear. "Clara, this has gone too far. Perhaps we should decline the invitation to the ball, remove ourselves from society for a while." "No," Clara's voice was steel. "That's exactly what they want. For me to disappear, to confirm their worst assumptions by hiding in shame. But, darling, your reputation. My reputation was destroyed the moment Adrian announced his engagement in the newspaper. Nothing I do now will make it worse." Clara moved to the window, watching carriages pass on the street below. "At least this way, I'm controlling the narrative. I'm making them see me on my terms." "With the Duke's protection," her mother said quietly. "Clara, what happens when he tires of this game? When defending you becomes more trouble than it's worth?" It was the question Clara had been avoiding for days. Julian Ashcroft was powerful, yes, but he was also a man who had lived his entire life in a world where people were useful until they weren't. What would happen when she stopped being an interesting cause and became simply an inconvenience? Before Clara could answer, the butler appeared with a card on a silver tray. "A visitor for Miss Whitmore. She says it's urgent." Clara took the card and felt her blood run cold. Lady Catherine Pemberton. "Show her to the drawing room," Clara said, her voice steadier than she felt. "And Mother, please stay. I want a witness to whatever this is." Lady Catherine looked terrible. Her face was pale and drawn, with dark circles under her eyes that even powder couldn't hide. She wore a traveling cloak over her dress, and her hands trembled as she clutched a small leather case. "Miss Whitmore," she said without preamble, "I need to speak with you, privately." "My mother stays," Clara said firmly. "Whatever you have to say can be said in front of her." Lady Catherine's jaw tightened, but she nodded. She glanced at Elizabeth, then back to Clara. "Very well. I came to warn you, though heaven knows why I'm bothering. You've caused me nothing but trouble." "I've caused you trouble?" Clara's voice rose despite her best efforts. "You're the one who insulted me at the Duke's table? Because you're walking into a trap." Lady Catherine's composure cracked. "And you're too blinded by your gratitude to the Duke to see it." Clara went very still. "What are you talking about?" Lady Catherine opened the leather case with shaking hands and pulled out a sheaf of letters. "These arrived at my home this morning, anonymously, with a note suggesting I might find their contents illuminating." She thrust the letters at Clara. "Read them. Then tell me if you still trust Julian Ashcroft." Clara took the letters, her heart pounding. They were written in a feminine hand, addressed to Julian, and dated from 2 years ago. She read the first one, then the second, then a third, each one making her stomach sink further. They were love letters. Passionate, desperate love letters from a woman named Eliza Hartwick to Julian Ashcroft. And in them, Eliza described a relationship remarkably similar to what Clara was experiencing. Julian's sudden interest, his protection against society's judgment, his promises of support and respect. The final letter was different. It was short, bitter, and concluded with a single devastating line. "You used me to hurt the Pemberton family, just as you're using that merchant girl now. I hope she's smarter than I was. Clara's hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped the letters. Who is Eliza Hartwick? Was, Lady Catherine corrected. She died last year. Consumption, they said, though my mother always suspected it was a broken heart. She took a deep breath. She was my cousin, and 2 years ago she was engaged to my brother before Julian Ashcroft decided to destroy that engagement. Why? Elizabeth asked, her face pale. Because my brother had humiliated Julian's sister years earlier, breaking off their engagement publicly. Julian wanted revenge, so he seduced Eliza, made her doubt my brother, caused enough scandal that the engagement fell apart. Lady Catherine's voice was bitter. Then he discarded her, moved on as if she'd never existed. My brother never married. Eliza wasted away, and Julian went about his life without a single consequence. Clara felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. You're lying. I wish I were. Lady Catherine's eyes were hard but honest. Look at the pattern, Miss Whitmore. Who benefits most from your scandal with the Duke? Not you, not your family, but Julian gets to play the hero while simultaneously destroying Adrian Locke's reputation and embarrassing the Pemberton family, my family, by extension. But why would he? Because Adrian's father was one of the men who voted against Julian's sister's petition for an independent income after her divorce. Because the Pembertons have opposed the Ashcrofts in Parliament for 3 generations. Because Julian Ashcroft is a man who holds grudges and plays a very long game. Clara's mind was racing, trying to make sense of it all. She thought about Julian's sudden interest, his perfect timing, his seemingly altruistic offer to help her. She thought about how convenient it all was, how neatly it allowed him to punish Adrian while also tormenting the Pemberton family. You attended his dinner knowing this, Clara said slowly. You came to warn me. I came to confront him, Lady Catherine admitted. But when I saw you there, wearing his grandmother's sapphire, looking at him with such trust, she shook her head. I handled it badly. The wine, the anger, the jealousy. I wanted to hurt you the way Eliza was hurt. But this morning when these letters arrived, I realized someone wants me to stay angry at you, wants us fighting each other while Julian orchestrates everything from above. Who sent you the letters? Elizabeth asked. I don't know, but whoever it was knew I'd come here, knew I'd show them to you. Lady Catherine stood, gathering the letters back into the case. Keep them or don't. Believe me or don't. But Miss Whitmore, if you're truly as intelligent as Julian claims, you'll ask yourself this. Why would a duke risk his reputation to help a merchant's daughter he barely knows? What does he really gain from your association? She moved toward the door, then paused. Adrian was a coward and a fool, but Julian Ashcroft is something far more dangerous. He's a strategist, and in his games, people like you and me are just pieces on a board. After she left, Clara and her mother sat in stunned silence. It could be lies, Elizabeth finally said. A desperate attempt to drive a wedge between you and the Duke. But what if it's not? Clara's voice was hollow. What if I've been so focused on proving I'm not weak that I walked straight into another trap? Before they could discuss it further, another visitor was announced. This time, it was Julian himself, arriving without warning or invitation. Your Grace, Clara said, her voice carefully neutral. This is unexpected. Julian's expression was grim. I came to warn you. Catherine Pemberton visited you this morning, didn't she? Clara's blood ran cold. How did you know that? Because she's been showing those letters to half of London, letters supposedly from my former acquaintance, Eliza Hartwick. He paused. Letters that are completely fabricated. Fabricated, Clara repeated flatly. Yes. Someone is trying to turn you against me by creating a false history. Julian moved closer, his eyes intense. Clara, I knew Eliza Hartwick. She was a friend, nothing more. When her engagement fell apart, I offered her support. That's all. There was no seduction, no revenge plot, no discarding, just friendship that ended when she married a country gentleman and moved to Yorkshire. She's dead, Clara said. I know. I attended her funeral. She died of consumption after years of illness, surrounded by her husband and 3 children. Julian's voice was steady, convincing. This story Catherine is spinning is a fiction designed to isolate you from the one person powerful enough to protect you. Clara wanted to believe him, but Lady Catherine's words echoed in her mind. In his games, people like you and me are just pieces on a board. Why would she lie? Clara asked. Because the Pembertons are desperate. My public support of you has made Adrian look like a coward, and Catherine like a shrew. They're hemorrhaging social capital. Julian took her hand, his touch warm. This is their attempt to drive a wedge between us before the ball. If you don't attend, they win. The narrative becomes that you realized I was using you and retreated in shame. And if I do attend? Then we show them that Clara Whitmore cannot be manipulated or frightened away by lies and gossip. It was compelling. It made sense. But something in Clara's chest had gone cold and quiet, a survival instinct honed by betrayal. I need time to think, she said, withdrawing her hand. Julian's expression flickered. Surprise, perhaps, or irritation. Clara, we don't have time. The ball is in 2 weeks. We need to present a united front. I said I need time. Clara's voice was firmer now. You've been generous and kind, Your Grace, but I won't be rushed into decisions anymore. Not by you, not by anyone. For a long moment, Julian studied her face. Then he nodded slowly. Very well. Take your time. But know this. If you decide to trust Catherine Pemberton over me, you'll be making the biggest mistake of your life. After he left, Clara sat down heavily, her mind spinning. What are you going to do? Her mother asked. I'm going to find out the truth. Clara stood, purpose crystallizing in her chest. And I know exactly who can help me. Margaret arrived within the hour, her face alight with curiosity. Your note said it was urgent. What's happened? Clara told her everything. The dinner party, Lady Catherine's visit, the letters, Julian's denial. Margaret listened with increasing fascination, occasionally interrupting with sharp questions. So either Julian is a calculating manipulator using you for revenge, Margaret summarized when Clara finished, or Catherine is a desperate liar trying to isolate you. Delightful options. Can you help me find out which? Of course I can. My late husband left me with very little money but excellent connections to London's gossip networks. Margaret's smile was sharp. If Julian Ashcroft seduced and abandoned a woman 2 years ago, someone knows about it. If Catherine Pemberton is fabricating letters, someone will have seen her with a forger. Give me 3 days. I don't have 3 days. The ball... Then tell the Duke you need 3 more days to consider. If he's genuine, he'll wait. If he's playing games, he'll push harder. Margaret gripped Clara's hand. Trust your instincts, cousin. They've kept you alive this long. The next 48 hours were torture. Clara sent a note to Julian requesting a brief postponement of her decision, citing family matters. His response was terse, but acceptable. Lady Catherine sent another letter, this one pleading with Clara not to attend the ball. Adrian sent nothing, which was somehow worse than either alternative. Meanwhile, Margaret worked her network of servants, shopkeepers, and disgraced aristocrats who traded in secrets. She visited Eliza Hartwick's widower in Yorkshire, spoke with former servants of the Ashcroft household, and tracked down the jeweler who had supposedly seen Julian buy expensive gifts for his mistress. On the 3rd day, she returned to the Whitmore house with a face like thunder. Well? Clara demanded. Margaret sank into a chair. It's worse than either of them told you. Clara's heart sank. What did you find? Eliza Hartwick was real. The affair was real. But it wasn't 2 years ago. It was 5. And it had nothing to do with revenge against the Pembertons. Margaret pulled out her own notes. Julian was 27, Eliza was 19. He courted her, promised marriage, then discarded her when his family objected to her modest connections. She did marry eventually, had children, and died of consumption. But everyone I spoke to said she never recovered from Julian's betrayal. Clara felt sick. So Catherine was telling the truth. About the affair, yes. About the revenge plot, no. Margaret leaned forward. Here's where it gets interesting. Those letters Catherine showed you? They're real letters from Eliza to Julian, but Catherine didn't get them anonymously. She bought them from Julian's former valet, who stole them years ago and has been selling them piecemeal to Julian's enemies. Then why would Catherine claim they arrived anonymously? Because she's trying to manipulate you without revealing she's been actively plotting against Julian for months. Margaret's expression was grim. She showed you just enough truth to make you doubt the Duke, but not enough to reveal her own scheme. Clara's head was spinning. So they're both lying to me. Not quite. Julian genuinely seems to want to help you now, regardless of his past sins. But he's also not being honest about Eliza. He wants you to believe he was a perfect gentleman who's being slandered, when the truth is he was a young fool who broke a woman's heart. Margaret paused. Margaret. As for Catherine, she's using you as a weapon against both Julian and Adrian. If you withdraw from the ball, Julian is humiliated. If you attend and are later revealed to have known about Eliza, Julian's reputation takes an even bigger hit. What about Adrian? Clara asked quietly. Adrian is drowning. His engagement to Catherine is a disaster. She despises him. He's still half in love with you, and both families are furious about the public spectacle. He's been drinking heavily and talking about leaving England entirely. Clara should have felt satisfaction at that. Instead, she just felt tired. So what do I do? She asked. Margaret's smile was fierce. You do what you always do, Clara. You make the choice that serves you best, and let everyone else deal with the consequences. The ball was 2 days away when Clara made her decision. She would attend, not because she trusted Julian, and certainly not because she wanted to help Catherine's schemes. She would attend because refusing to go would mean letting other people's lies and manipulations control her life. She was done being a chess piece in other people's games, but she would go on her own terms, with her eyes open and her guard up. The day of the ball, the dressmaker Julian had recommended delivered a gown that took Clara's breath away. It was deep emerald green silk with gold embroidery, cut to emphasize her figure without being scandalous. With it came a note from Julian, for a woman who deserves to outshine everyone in the room. Clara stared at the dress for a long time, then made a decision that surprised even herself. She didn't wear it. Instead, she wore a dress of her own choosing, a stunning midnight blue gown that her father had commissioned from a dressmaker in Paris. It was beautiful, expensive, and most importantly, not chosen by Julian Ashcroft. She paired it with simple pearl earrings that had belonged to her grandmother, not borrowed jewels from the Duke's vault. When her carriage arrived at the ball that evening, Clara stepped out looking like herself, wealthy, elegant, and beholden to no one. The ballroom at Ashcroft House was magnificent, ablaze with hundreds of candles and filled with what seemed like half of London's aristocracy. Clara entered alone, her parents having decided their presence might complicate matters, and felt every eye in the room turned toward her. Julian materialized at her side immediately, his expression unreadable as he took in her dress. You didn't wear the gown I sent. No, Clara said simply. I wore my own. Something flickered across his face, anger, perhaps, or grudging respect. May I have this dance? Actually, I'd prefer to speak with you privately first. There are things we need to discuss. Julian's jaw tightened, but he nodded. He led her through the crowd to a private study off the main ballroom, closing the door behind them. What is this about, Clara? She faced him directly, her voice steady. It's about Eliza Hartwick. The real story, not the version you told me. Julian went very still. I see Catherine has been more persuasive than I gave her credit for. This isn't about Catherine. This is about you lying to me. Clara's voice was hard. You said there was no affair, no seduction. But there was, wasn't there? 5 years ago, you courted a young woman and discarded her when your family objected. I was 27 years old and in love with someone my family deemed unsuitable. Yes, I ended it badly. Yes, I hurt her. Julian's voice was cold. But that was 5 years ago, and it has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with me. Clara's composure finally cracked. Because it shows me exactly who you are, a man who uses people and discards them when they become inconvenient, a man who lies when the truth is uncomfortable. I'm trying to help you. Are you? Or are you using me to settle old scores with the Pembertons and humiliate Adrian Locke? Clara took a step closer. Because that's what Catherine thinks. That's what half of London thinks. And the terrible thing is, I don't know if they're wrong. Julian's expression turned dangerous. You don't know anything about my motivations. Then tell me, Clara's voice rose. Tell me the truth for once, all of it. Why did you really defend me? Why do you care what happens to a merchant's daughter you barely know? For a long moment, Julian just stared at her. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You want the truth? Fine, you're right. When I first heard about your situation with Locke, my initial thought was that it presented an opportunity. Adrian's father has opposed me in Parliament for years. The Pembertons have been thorns in my side for longer than that. Helping you humiliate them both was too perfect to resist. Clara felt like she'd been slapped, even though she'd already suspected as much. But then I met you, Julian continued, his voice softening, and you weren't what I expected. You weren't a victim or a fool. You were strong and sharp and brave. And somewhere along the way, this stopped being about revenge and started being about you. How convenient, Clara said bitterly. It's the truth. Julian moved closer, his eyes intense. Yes, I used Eliza badly 5 years ago. Yes, I've used my power to settle scores and manipulate outcomes. But I'm not using you, Clara. I'm trying to protect you while also admiring the hell out of you. And if I don't attend your ball, if I walk out of here right now, then you'll prove Catherine right. You'll prove that I was just using you, that you were naive enough to fall for it twice. You'll give them all exactly what they want, your humiliation and my downfall. It was manipulation, Clara knew. But it was also true. Before she could respond, the study door burst open. Adrian Locke stood in the doorway, swaying slightly, his face flushed with drink and desperation. I need to talk to Clara, he said. Alone. Julian's hand went to Clara's arm, protective. Locke, you're drunk. Leave before you embarrass yourself further. I'm not leaving until she hears me. Adrian's eyes found Clara's. Please. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Clara looked between the two men, Julian, who had lied about his past but might be telling the truth about his present, and Adrian, who had destroyed her heart and was now falling apart. 5 minutes, she said quietly. Julian, please wait outside. Julian's expression was thunderous. Clara, 5 minutes. Then I'll make my decision about tonight. He left, but the look he gave Adrian could have curdled milk. When they were alone, Adrian collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands. I've ruined everything, he said. My engagement, my reputation, my life, all because I was too weak to fight for you. You made your choice, Clara said, her voice empty of emotion. I made the wrong choice. Adrian looked up at her, his eyes red. Catherine is miserable. I'm miserable. Our families are at each other's throats. And worst of all, I have to watch you with him, knowing he's using you the same way he used Eliza Hartwick. How do you know about Eliza? Catherine told me. She showed me the letters, told me about Julian's history. She's trying to save you, Clara. She knows what he is. Clara laughed bitterly. Catherine is trying to destroy Julian through me. Don't pretend this is altruism. Maybe it started that way, but after last night, Adrian stopped abruptly. After what happened last night, Adrian's face went pale. Nothing. I shouldn't have said anything. Cold dread filled Clara's stomach. Adrian, what happened last night? He looked at her for a long moment, then seemed to crumble. Catherine met with some men. Dangerous men. She's planning something for tonight, something to humiliate Julian publicly. I didn't want any part of it, but she said if I didn't help, she'd ruin my family completely. What is she planning? Clara's voice was deadly quiet. I don't know the details, but it involves you, and it involves those letters, and it's going to happen tonight at the ball. Adrian stood shakily. I came to warn you. You need to leave. Now, before... The door flew open again, but this time it wasn't Julian. It was Lady Catherine herself, her face twisted with rage, flanked by 2 stern-looking men Clara didn't recognize. How touching, Catherine said coldly. The coward grows a conscience, too late as usual. Catherine, don't do this, Adrian pleaded. Don't do what? Clara demanded. What's going on? Catherine's smile was vicious. What's going on, Miss Whitmore, is that you're about to learn what happens to women who reach above their station. Those men I mentioned? They're journalists. And in about 10 minutes, they're going to publish a very interesting story about the Duke of Ashcroft's latest mistress and the letters that prove a pattern of seduction
and abandonment. Clara's blood ran cold. You're going to publish Eliza's letters, along with some very creative descriptions of your relationship with Julian, sourced from anonymous witnesses who have seen you in compromising positions. Catherine's voice was triumphant. By tomorrow morning, both you and the Duke will be ruined, and Adrian will be free of this farce of an engagement, because no one will blame him for ending it after his fiancé's family was dragged through such scandal. You're insane, Adrian breathed. I'm practical. Catherine turned to the journalists. Gentlemen, I believe we have everything we need. The documents are in my carriage. Shall we proceed to the printing house? Wait! Clara's voice cut through the room like a blade. You're making a mistake. Catherine laughed. I don't think so. You are. Because if you publish those letters, you won't destroy Julian. You'll destroy yourself. How do you figure that? Clara's mind was racing, pieces clicking into place with sudden, terrible clarity. Because Julian Ashcroft is the most powerful man in London, and you're about to make an enemy of him in the most public way possible. He'll crush you, Catherine, your family, your reputation, everything. And for what? Revenge? Jealousy? For justice, Catherine spat. For Eliza. For every woman he's used and discarded. Eliza died in Yorkshire, surrounded by her loving husband and children, Clara said quietly. I had someone investigate. She was happy, Catherine. She'd moved on with her life. You're the one who can't let go. Catherine's face went white. You're lying. Ask your mother. Ask anyone who actually knew Eliza in her final years. Clara took a step forward. You've built this entire crusade on a version of events that exists only in your head, and now you're about to commit a crime that could land you in serious legal trouble. Theft of private correspondence, criminal libel, all to avenge a woman who forgave Julian years ago. One of the journalists cleared his throat uncomfortably. Lady Catherine, if what she's saying is true, it's not. But Catherine's voice had lost its certainty. The door opened once more, and Julian entered with 2 constables. Lady Catherine Pemberton, one of the constables said formally. You're under arrest for theft of private property and attempted criminal libel. Catherine's face went from white to red. You can't do this. I can, actually. Julian's voice was ice. Those letters you stole from my former valet? They're my legal property, and the false statements you've been spreading about Miss Whitmore constitute criminal libel. The journalists you hired have already given statements in exchange for immunity. The journalists had, in fact, melted away during Clara's confrontation with Catherine, evidently having decided this scandal wasn't worth their involvement. As the constables led a screaming Catherine away, Adrian sank back into his chair looking broken. Julian turned to Clara, his expression unreadable. How did you know to bring the constables? Clara asked. Because I've been tracking Catherine's movements for weeks. I knew she was planning something for tonight. He paused. What I didn't know was whether you would believe her accusations and leave, or stay and face them down. You surprised me, Clara. I'm full of surprises. They stood in tense silence as Adrian quietly left the room, following the constables. When they were alone, Julian spoke again. Everything you said to me earlier about using you, about lying, you were right. I did lie about Eliza, and my initial motives for helping you were selfish. But Clara, at some point in all this mess, you stopped being a means to an end and became— Don't, Clara interrupted. Please don't finish that sentence. Why not? Because I'm not ready to hear it. Because I don't know if I'll ever be ready. Clara's voice shook. Adrian broke my heart by choosing money over love. I can't let you break it by making me question whether anything you feel is real or just another manipulation. Julian's jaw clenched. So what now? Clara looked toward the ballroom where music and laughter continued, oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded. Now I go out there and dance. I show London society that Clara Whitmore doesn't run, doesn't hide, and doesn't let anyone else write her story. And us? There is no us. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Clara met his eyes directly. You wanted to know if I was brave enough to stand beside you? I am, but on my terms, not yours. I'll attend your ball. I'll let you help rebuild my reputation, but my heart, my trust, my future? Those are mine alone until I decide otherwise. For a long moment, Julian simply looked at her. Then slowly, he smiled.
a real smile, not the calculated expression he showed the world. "Fair enough," he said quietly. "Shall we dance, Miss Whitmore?" Clara took his offered arm, and together they walked back into the ballroom. As they moved onto the dance floor, every eye in the room turned to watch. Clara could hear the whispers starting, could feel the weight of speculation and judgment. But this time, she didn't care. She had survived betrayal, heartbreak, and manipulation. She had faced down lies and schemes and come out stronger. And if London society wanted to keep testing her, they would learn what Clara Whitmore had already discovered about herself. She was done breaking. From now on, she would be the one setting the terms. The waltz was perfect, and that made it dangerous. Julian's hand was warm at Clara's waist as they moved across the polished floor, their bodies in perfect synchronization despite having never danced together before. Around them, the crowd had fallen into an expectant hush, watching with predatory fascination to see what would happen next in the scandal that had consumed London society for weeks. Clara could feel the weight of their stares, could practically hear the thoughts racing through their minds. Was she his mistress? Had Catherine Pemberton been right? Would the Duke tire of this merchant's daughter the way he'd supposedly tired of Eliza Hartwick? "You're thinking too much," Julian murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "I can feel it in the way you're holding yourself." "I'm wondering what they're all thinking," Clara admitted. "Does it matter?" "It did a month ago. Now?" She looked up at him, her eyes hard. "Now I think I'm starting to understand that their opinions have only as much power as I give them." Julian's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "And how much power are you giving them?" "Less and less each day." Clara smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Though I notice you still haven't answered my earlier question. What happens to us when this is over?" "When what is over?" "This game, this performance, whatever you want to call it." Clara's voice was quiet enough that only he could hear. "Catherine's been arrested. Adrian is disgraced. The Pembertons are humiliated. You've won, Your Grace. So what happens to the peace you used to achieve that victory?" Julian's expression flickered. Pain, perhaps, or something close to it. "You're not a piece, Clara." "Aren't I? Then what am I?" The waltz ended before he could answer. The room erupted in polite applause, and Clara used the moment to slip away from Julian's grasp, moving toward the edge of the dance floor where her cousin Margaret waited with barely concealed glee. "Well," Margaret said, handing Clara a glass of champagne, "that was quite the entrance. Half the room looks scandalized and the other half looks jealous." "Which half are you?" Clara asked, taking a long drink. "The half that's impressed. You look like you owned that dance floor." Margaret's expression turned more serious. "But Clara, what happened in that study? I saw Catherine being led away by constables." Clara gave her cousin a brief summary of the confrontation, watching Margaret's eyes widen with each revelation. When she finished, Margaret let out a low whistle. "So Catherine tried to destroy you both and ended up destroying herself instead. There's a certain poetic justice to that." "Is there?" Clara's voice was bitter. "Because from where I'm standing, nothing has actually changed. I'm still the merchant's daughter who fell for an earl's lies. Julian is still the Duke with a questionable past. And everyone in this room is still waiting for me to fail so they can say they knew all along I didn't belong here." "Then prove them wrong," the voice came from behind them. Clara turned to find the Countess of Bedford, the same woman who had offered backhanded compliments at Julian's dinner party. But her expression now held something different. Not quite warmth, but a sort of grudging respect. "Your Grace," Clara said, inclining her head, "Miss Whitmore, I wanted to apologize for my behavior at the Duke's dinner. I was less than welcoming." "You were perfectly polite," Clara said carefully. "I was calculating," the Countess corrected. "Trying to determine which way the wind was blowing before committing to any particular position regarding you and the Duke." She paused. "But watching you handle Catherine Pemberton tonight, watching you refuse to be intimidated or driven away, that showed me something important." "What's that?" "That you're not here to beg for acceptance or approval. You're here because you have every right to be here, regardless of what anyone else thinks." The Countess smiled faintly. "That's a lesson some of us born into this world never learn. We spend our whole lives seeking approval we don't actually need." She moved away before Clara could respond, leaving Clara staring after her in mild shock. "Well," Margaret said quietly, "that's new?" It was the first of several similar encounters throughout the evening. A baroness who had snubbed Clara at Lady Hartwell's reception now engaged her in genuine conversation about literature. A young viscountess asked Clara's opinion on a business matter, treating her merchant background as an asset rather than a liability. Even some of the men who had whispered cruel gossip weeks earlier now spoke to her with cautious respect. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. London society was recalibrating its assessment of Clara Whitmore, and the calculation was coming out differently than before. But not everyone was ready to accept the change. "How delightful!" a sharp voice cut through the pleasant conversation. "The little merchant girl has made some friends. How very democratic." Clara turned to find herself facing Viscountess Sarah Blackwood, one of the most influential women in London society and a longtime friend of the Pemberton family. She was in her 50s, impeccably dressed, and known for her ability to destroy reputations with a well-placed word. "Lady Blackwood," Clara said evenly, "how lovely to see you." "Is it?" The Viscountess's smile was all teeth. "I'm surprised you're still here, Miss Whitmore. I would have thought after the scene with poor Catherine you'd have the decency to withdraw quietly." "Poor Catherine," Margaret interjected. "The woman who tried to commit criminal libel?" Catherine was protecting society from a fortune hunter and the Duke from his own questionable judgment. Lady Blackwood's eyes raked over Clara with open disdain. "Though I suppose we shouldn't be surprised. Girls of her class often confuse kindness with romantic interest." Clara felt the familiar burn of humiliation rising in her chest, but this time it was accompanied by something else, a cold, clarifying anger. "Tell me, Lady Blackwood," Clara said quietly, "when your husband's shipping company was facing bankruptcy 15 years ago, wasn't it my father who extended the credit that saved it?" The Viscountess's face went rigid. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I do. I found the records in my father's office. Thomas Whitmore loaned Viscount Blackwood £30,000 at extremely favorable terms, asking for nothing in return except discretion." Clara's voice remained pleasant, but her eyes were hard. "Without that loan, your family would have lost everything. Your title would still exist, of course, but you'd be living in significantly reduced circumstances." "How dare you, Vicky—" "I'm not finished." Clara took a step closer, and the Viscountess actually backed up. "For 15 years, you've enjoyed the fortune my father helped preserve, and in that time, you've never once acknowledged the debt, never shown any gratitude, never done anything except look down your nose at the man who saved your family from ruin." A crowd was gathering now, drawn by the confrontation. Clara could see Julian moving toward them through the throng, but she didn't need his intervention, not this time. "So when you talk about people of my class confusing kindness with romantic interest, what you really mean is that we should know our place. We should be grateful for whatever scraps of acknowledgement you deign to throw our way. We should never, ever expect to be treated as equals, no matter how much money we have or how much we've done for you." Clara's voice rose slightly. "Is that about right, Lady Blackwood?" The Viscountess's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. "Because if that's the case," Clara continued, "then I should inform you that my father has decided to call in some of his outstanding debts. All of them. The Blackwood loan, with 15 years of accumulated interest, is due in full within 30 days. It was a bluff. Clara had no authority to make such demands on her father's behalf, but the expression on Lady Blackwood's face suggested she believed every word. "You can't do that," the Viscountess whispered. "Can't I? You just finished explaining how people of my class behave. Perhaps we're more cutthroat and mercenary than you gave us credit for." Clara smiled sweetly. "Though I'm sure if you were to apologize, sincerely, and perhaps publicly acknowledge the debt your family owes to mine, my father might be persuaded to be generous. Again." For a long electric moment, Lady Blackwood stared at Clara with undisguised hatred. Then, slowly, she lowered her eyes. "I apologize for my rudeness, Miss Whitmore, and I acknowledge that my family has benefited greatly from your father's generosity." The words came out strangled but audible. "Please convey my gratitude to Mr. Whitmore." "I will." Clara's voice was gracious in victory. "Enjoy the rest of your evening, Lady Blackwood." The Viscountess fled, and the crowd that had gathered erupted into excited whispers. Clara felt her hand shaking with adrenaline, but she kept her expression calm and pleasant. That, Margaret breathed, was the most magnificent thing I've ever witnessed. Julian appeared at Clara's side, his expression unreadable. "May I speak with you? Privately?" Clara nodded, allowing him to guide her back toward the study where they'd confronted Catherine hours earlier. Once inside, he closed the door and turned to face her. "What you just did out there was necessary," Clara finished. "I'm tired of being treated like I should be grateful just to be tolerated, Julian. I'm tired of watching people like Lady Blackwood benefit from my family's generosity while treating us like we're beneath them." "I'm not criticizing you." Julian's voice was quiet. "I'm in awe of you. Do you know how long I've watched that woman terrorize people with impunity? And you took her apart in under 5 minutes." "I threatened to bankrupt her family," Clara said, the reality of what she'd done suddenly hitting her. "I don't even know if my father would actually call in that debt. It doesn't matter. What matters is that she believes you could and that you would." Julian moved closer. "Clara, you've spent weeks thinking of yourself as weak because Adrian hurt you, but that's not weakness. That's humanity. What you just demonstrated out there? That's strength, real strength." Clara met his eyes, searching for signs of manipulation or calculation. But all she saw was genuine admiration and something else, something that made her chest tighten with an emotion she wasn't ready to name. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked quietly. "And please, for once, just tell me the truth. No strategy, no games, just the truth." Julian was quiet for a long moment. Then he took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "Because I've spent my entire life playing roles. The dutiful son, the perfect duke, the strategic alliance maker. I've been so careful, so controlled, that I forgot what it felt like to do something just because it was right." He paused. "And then I saw you at that reception, facing down a room full of people who wanted to break you, and I remembered what courage looked like." "That's not an answer." "Yes, it is. You asked me once what you are to me. You're a reminder that there's more to life than winning at politics and accumulating power. You're proof that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to let the world make you small." Julian's grip on her hand tightened. "And somewhere along the way, you became the first person in years who I wanted to be honest with, even when it made me vulnerable." Clara's breath caught. "Julian, I'm not asking for anything," he interrupted. "I know you're not ready. I know you may never be ready, and I've earned that. I just wanted you to know that whatever happens between us, you've already changed me, and I'm grateful for that." Before Clara could respond, there was a sharp knock on the door. Margaret entered without waiting for permission, her face pale. "Clara, you need to come, now." "What's happened?" "Adrian is here, and he's making a scene in the ballroom." They found Adrian standing in the center of the dance floor, disheveled and clearly intoxicated, addressing the assembled guests in a voice that carried to every corner of the room. "You all want to know the truth?" he was saying. "About Miss Whitmore? About me? About all of it? Fine. Here's the truth." "Adrian, stop," Clara said, moving toward him. "You're drunk. Let me get you a carriage." "I loved her." Adrian's voice cracked. "I loved Clara Whitmore more than I've ever loved anyone in my miserable life. And I threw that away because I was a coward who cared more about money and status than I did about being happy." The room had gone deathly silent. "Adrian, please," Clara tried again. "No, they need to hear this. They need to know that she did nothing wrong. She believed my lies because I was very good at lying. She trusted my promises because I made those promises convincingly." Adrian's eyes found Clara's, and they were filled with tears. "And when I broke those promises, she didn't deserve any of what happened. She deserved better. She deserved everything." "That's enough," Julian said coldly, moving to stand between Adrian and Clara. "Locke, you've said your piece. Now leave before you make this worse." "Worse for who? For Clara? For you?" Adrian laughed bitterly. "You think you're so much better than me, Ashcroft, but you're using her the same way I did, just for different reasons. At least I loved her. You just see her as a tool for your games." Julian's hand shot out, grabbing Adrian by the collar. "Watch your words very carefully, Locke." "Or what? You'll ruin me? You'll destroy my reputation?" Adrian's smile was broken. "You're too late. I've already done that myself." Stop it, both of you. Clara's voice cut through the tension like a knife. She looked at Adrian, and despite everything he'd done, she felt a surge of pity for the wreck he'd become. Adrian, go home, sleep this off, and tomorrow start building a life that doesn't revolve around me or what we used to have. I don't know how, Adrian whispered. Then learn, the same way I did. Clara's voice softened slightly. You broke my heart, Adrian, but I survived it. I'm surviving it, and eventually I'll move past it. You need to do the same. Adrian stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. He let Julian release him and stumbled toward the exit, leaving stunned silence in his wake. The Countess of Bedford was the first to speak. Well, she said dryly, that was certainly dramatic. It broke the tension. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd, and gradually conversations resumed. But Clara could feel every eye still tracking her, watching to see what she would do next. She walked to the center of the ballroom, to the exact spot where Adrian had just made his drunken confession. Then she turned to face the assembled aristocracy of London with her head held high. I think we can all agree, she said, her voice carrying clearly, that this evening has been eventful, but I want to make something very clear. I am not here seeking your pity, your approval, or your permission to exist in this world. I am here because the Duke of Ashcroft invited me, and I accepted that invitation on my own terms. She paused, letting her words sink in. Some of you have been kind to me tonight, others have been cruel, but all of you have been watching, waiting to see if I would break, if I would run, if I would prove that I don't belong here. And I want you to know something. I don't care. A murmur ran through the crowd. I don't care if you think I belong here or not. I don't care if you approve of me or judge me or gossip about me over your morning tea, because I've learned something over these past few weeks. Your opinions only have as much power as I give them, and I'm done giving them any power at all. Clara looked around the room, meeting eyes with the people who had sneered at her, pitied her, used her for entertainment. I am Clara Whitmore, daughter of Thomas and Elizabeth Whitmore. My father built his fortune through hard work and intelligence, and I'm proud of that. I was engaged to a man who proved unworthy of my trust, but that says nothing about my worth and everything about his character. And whatever my relationship with the Duke of Ashcroft may or may not be, it is nobody's business but our own. She turned to Julian, who was watching her with an expression of undisguised admiration. Your Grace, would you do me the honor of another dance? Julian moved forward, a smile playing at his lips. It would be my pleasure, Miss Whitmore. As they took position on the dance floor, the orchestra, which had been watching the drama unfold with everyone else, struck up another waltz. This time other couples joined them, the normal flow of the ball resuming as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But everything had changed. Clara could feel it in the way people watched her now, not with pity or scorn, but with a kind of wary respect. She had faced down Lady Blackwood, survived Adrian's public confession, and claimed her right to exist in this world without apology or explanation. That speech, Julian murmured as they danced, was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever witnessed. Does it matter which? No. Either way, it was magnificent. He smiled. Though you've just made yourself the most talked about woman in London. I was already the most talked about woman in London. I just changed what they're talking about. Fair point. Julian's expression grew more serious. Clara, what Adrian said was the drunken rambling of a man who destroyed his own happiness. It doesn't change anything. Doesn't it? He said I'm using you, and he's not entirely wrong, at least about how this started. Julian's voice dropped. But I need you to know that whatever my initial motivations were, they're not why I'm still here. They're not why I can't stop thinking about you, or why the idea of you walking out of my life makes me want to burn down everything I've built just to change your mind. Clara's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could feel it. Julian, you don't have to say anything. I know you're not ready, may never be ready. But I needed you to hear it at least once. Everything else, the scandal, the politics, the games, none of it matters as much as this, as you. The waltz ended. Julian stepped back, bowing formally as if they'd just had a perfectly ordinary dance. But his eyes held a promise, a question, and a challenge all at once. Clara returned his bow with a curtsy, her mind racing. She had come to this ball prepared to maintain her guard, to keep Julian at arm's length, to protect her heart from another betrayal. But standing there in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by the same society that had tried to destroy her, Clara realized something important. She wasn't the same girl who had believed Adrian's lies. She wasn't even the same woman who had walked into Julian's study earlier tonight, demanding truth and refusing to be manipulated. She was someone new, someone stronger, someone who could make her own choices and accept the consequences, good or bad. The question was, what choice would she make? The rest of the ball passed in a blur of conversations and dances. Clara found herself genuinely enjoying parts of it, engaging with people who seemed to actually want to know her rather than simply calculate her usefulness. Margaret stayed close, providing sardonic commentary and running interference when needed, and Julian remained a constant presence, not hovering or possessive, but available whenever Clara needed him. It was nearly midnight when Clara found herself back on the terrace, needing a moment of quiet after hours of performance. The garden below was lit with lanterns, creating pools of warm light in the darkness. Escaping? Clara turned to find Julian emerging from the ballroom, 2 glasses of champagne in his hands. He offered her one, and she accepted it gratefully. "Just catching my breath," she said. "It's been quite an evening." "That's one way to describe it." Julian leaned against the railing beside her. "For what it's worth, I think you handled everything perfectly. Better than perfectly. I threatened to bankrupt a viscountess and gave a speech that was probably wildly inappropriate for a ball. You defended yourself and claimed your right to respect. There's nothing inappropriate about that." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to music drift from the ballroom. Clara took a sip of champagne, gathering her thoughts. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier," she finally said, "about wanting to be honest with me, about how I changed you. And I think I believe you, which terrifies me, because the last time I believed someone, he broke my heart so thoroughly I didn't think I'd ever recover." Clara turned to face Julian fully. "But I did recover. I'm stronger now than I was before Adrian, and I think part of that strength is learning to trust my own judgment again." Julian set down his glass carefully. "What are you saying, Clara?" "I'm saying that I'm not ready to trust you with my heart. Not yet, maybe not for a long time, but I'm willing to see where this goes, whatever this is." She paused. "On one condition." "Name it." "No more games. No more manipulation, no matter how well-intentioned. If we do this, whatever this is, we do it honestly. You tell me the truth even when it's uncomfortable, even when it makes you vulnerable." "I can do that." Julian's voice was quiet but certain. "Can you?" "Because I've seen you operate, Julian. You're brilliant at reading people, at saying exactly what they need to hear. How do I know you won't use that skill on me?" "You don't," Julian admitted. "Not for certain, but I can promise you this. I will try. Every day, I will try to be honest with you, even when every instinct tells me to be strategic instead. And if I fail, if I slip back into old patterns, I give you permission to call me on it, to leave if necessary. Because, Clara, I would rather lose you by being honest than keep you through manipulation." Clara studied his face in the lantern light, searching for any sign of deception. But all she saw was sincerity and something that looked almost like fear, the fear of a man who had finally found something he couldn't afford to lose. "All right," she said quietly. "Then let's see what happens." Julian's smile was slow and genuine, transforming his usually guarded features into something almost boyish. "Just like that?" "Just like that. Though I reserve the right to change my mind if you do anything stupid." "Fair enough." Julian took her hand, raising it to his lips. "Thank you, Clara, for taking a chance on someone who probably doesn't deserve it." "Probably not," Clara agreed, but she was smiling. "But I'm done making decisions based on what I should do or what's safe. From now on, I make choices based on what I actually want." "What do you want?" Clara looked at him, this complicated, powerful man who had defended her when no one else would, who had lied to her and then told her the truth, who had given her the tools to rebuild her life on her own terms. "I want to find out who I can become when I stop letting fear make my decisions." She squeezed his hand. "And I think you might want to find out the same thing." From inside the ballroom, the clock began to chime midnight. The ball was ending, the guests beginning to filter toward the exits. Soon, tomorrow would begin, and with it, all the gossip and consequences of tonight's events. But standing on the terrace with Julian's hand warm in hers, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Not the naive hope of a girl who believed in fairy tales and perfect endings, but the hard-won hope of a woman who had survived betrayal and come out stronger. The hope that said she could build something real and lasting from the ashes of what had been destroyed. The hope that said her story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The story was just beginning, but the world didn't wait for Clara to catch her breath. The morning after the ball, London erupted with gossip so intense it seemed to vibrate through the very cobblestones. By noon, 3 different newspapers had published accounts of the evening's events: Adrian's drunken confession, Catherine's arrest, Clara's confrontation with Lady Blackwood, and most scandalously, the Duke of Ashcroft's obvious affection for a merchant's daughter. Clara read the articles over breakfast while her mother paced the room in a state of agitation that bordered on panic. "They're calling you the Merchant Queen," Elizabeth said, wringing her hands. "Some are saying you've bewitched the Duke. Others are claiming you're a social revolutionary trying to destroy the aristocracy from within. Clara, this is beyond scandal. This is notoriety." "Is it?" Clara set down the paper calmly. "Because half these articles are praising my courage and intelligence. The Times even ran an editorial questioning why birth should matter more than character in determining social standing. The other half are calling you a calculating opportunist." "Let them." Clara met her mother's eyes. "I spent weeks caring what they thought, and it nearly destroyed me. I'm done with that." Thomas Whitmore entered the breakfast room with his own stack of newspapers and a thoughtful expression. "Clara, I need to speak with you about the Blackwood matter." Clara's stomach clenched. In the heat of confronting the Viscountess, she'd made threats she had no authority to carry out. "Father, I apologize. I shouldn't have implied that you would call in their debt without consulting you first. Actually," Thomas interrupted, settling into his chair, "I think we should do exactly that." Both Clara and Elizabeth stared at him in shock. "Thomas, what are you saying?" Elizabeth demanded. "I'm saying that for 15 years, I've extended generosity to families like the Blackwoods, while they've treated us as beneath them. I've loaned money, provided favorable business terms, and asked for nothing in return except basic respect." His voice was calm but firm. "And what have we received? Condescension, disdain, and the assumption that we should be grateful for their tolerance. Well, I'm done being tolerant of their intolerance." He looked at Clara with pride. "My daughter stood up to one of the most influential women in London and demanded the respect our family deserves. I'll be damned if I'm going to undermine that by continuing to subsidize her contempt." "But the social consequences," Elizabeth began, "will be exactly what they've always been. Some will hate us, some will respect us, and most will simply recalculate their position based on where their interests lie." Thomas smiled. "The only difference is that now we're demanding they make that calculation honestly." A servant entered with a card on a tray. "A visitor for Miss Whitmore, the Duke of Ashcroft." Clara's heart skipped, but she kept her voice steady. "Show him to the drawing room. I'll be there shortly." She found Julian standing by the window, looking out at the street with an expression of deep thought. He turned when she entered, and his face softened in a way that made her chest tight. "Good morning," he said. "I hope I'm not calling too early." "Not at all, though I assume this isn't a social visit." "Partly social, partly strategic." Julian's expression turned serious. "Clara, the scandal from last night has reached levels I didn't fully anticipate. There are people, powerful people, who view your rise in society as a direct threat to the established order." "My rise?" Clara laughed. "Julian, I haven't risen anywhere. I simply refuse to sink." And that's precisely what terrifies them. Because if a merchant's daughter can demand respect and receive it, if birth becomes less important than character, then the entire foundation of aristocratic privilege starts to crack. He paused. "They're going to fight back, Clara. Hard." "Let them fight, huh?" Clara's voice was steel. "I'm not backing down." "I know. That's why I'm here." Julian pulled a document from his jacket. "This is a marriage contract." Clara's breath stopped. "What?" "Before you panic, let me explain. It's not a proposal, not in the traditional sense. It's a strategic alliance." Julian's voice was careful, measured. "If we marry, you gain protection that goes beyond social influence. You become a duchess, which means anyone who attacks you attacks one of the most powerful families in England. Your family's business interests gain aristocratic backing. Your father's debts to people like the Blackwoods become noble obligations. Clara felt like the floor was tilting. You're proposing a business arrangement. I'm proposing a partnership, one that benefits both of us while also allowing us to explore whatever this is between us without the constant pressure of scandal and judgment. Julian set the contract on a table between them. Read it. Take as long as you need. But Clara, I want you to know, this isn't manipulation. This is me offering you a choice. A choice to marry you for strategic reasons rather than emotional ones. Clara's voice was hollow. How is that different from what Adrian did? Choosing Catherine for her dowry instead of me for love? Because I'm not asking you to believe I love you. I'm not making promises about forever or claiming this is some grand romance. I'm offering you a genuine partnership with clearly defined terms and mutual benefits. No lies, no hidden agendas. Julian's eyes met hers. And if, somewhere in that partnership, we discover something more, then we'll have built it on honesty rather than pretty words and broken promises. Clara stared at the contract, her mind racing. Everything he said made strategic sense. Marriage to a duke would solve nearly every problem she faced, but it would also trap her in yet another arrangement where practical considerations outweighed emotion. I need time to think, she said quietly. Of course. Take all the time you need. Julian moved toward the door, then paused. Clara, whatever you decide, know that I meant what I said last night. You've changed me. And regardless of whether you accept this proposal, I won't regret asking. After he left, Clara sat alone with the contract, feeling the weight of the choice pressing down on her. She could marry Julian and secure everything, protection, status, stability, or she could refuse and continue fighting on her own terms, risking everything in the process. The decision was interrupted by another visitor. This time, it was someone Clara hadn't expected to see again. Adrian Locke looked terrible, pale, hollow-eyed, and carrying himself like a man who had aged a decade overnight. But he was sober, and his expression held a desperate sincerity that Clara remembered from the early days of their courtship. Miss Whitmore, he said formally, thank you for seeing me. I know I have no right to your time. Then why are you here, Adrian? To apologize. Properly this time without the alcohol or the drama. He took a deep breath. I destroyed what we had because I was weak and cowardly. I chose money over love, status over happiness, and I've spent every day since then regretting it. I know, Clara said quietly. You made that very clear last night. Last night I was drunk and pathetic. This morning I'm just pathetic, but at least I'm sober enough to say this properly. Adrian's hands clenched at his sides. You deserved better than me, Clara. You deserved honesty and courage and someone willing to fight for you. And I failed you in every possible way. Yes, you did. The blunt agreement seemed to hit Adrian like a physical blow, but he nodded. I've ended my engagement to Catherine. Or rather, she ended it after her arrest, and I didn't fight to save it. Her family is furious, my family is disappointed, and my reputation is in ruins. But for the first time in months, I feel like I can breathe. Clara studied him, trying to reconcile this broken man with the charming Earl who had once promised her the world. What do you want from me, Adrian? Forgiveness? Absolution? Nothing. I want nothing from you except the chance to say that I'm sorry and that I'm leaving London, going to the continent for a few years, trying to figure out how to be the kind of man who deserves someone like you, even if that someone will never be you. There was a time when those words would have broken Clara's heart all over again. But standing there in her family's drawing room, looking at the wreckage of the man who had once defined her happiness, Clara felt only a distant sort of sadness. I hope you find what you're looking for, she said honestly. And Adrian, I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I'm tired of carrying anger around like armor. I want to be free of this, of you, of all of it. Adrian's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. That's more than I deserve. Yes, it is. Clara's voice was gentle but firm. Goodbye, Adrian. She watched him leave, and with his departure, something inside her finally truly let go. The girl who had loved Adrian Locke, who had believed his promises and built dreams around his lies. That girl was gone. And Clara was surprised to discover she didn't mourn her loss. That evening, Clara sat in her father's study with the marriage contract spread before her and Margaret providing sardonic commentary from the corner. "It's actually quite generous," Margaret observed, reading over Clara's shoulder. "You'd maintain control of your own inheritance, have equal say in household decisions, and there's a clause here that allows for separate residences if desired. He's essentially offering you independence within marriage." "Which is exactly what makes it suspicious," Clara muttered. "No aristocrat gives up that much control willingly. Maybe he's not like other aristocrats, or maybe he really does care about you more than he cares about traditional power dynamics." Margaret shrugged. "Either way, it's a better offer than most women in your position would get." "I'm not most women." "No, you're certainly not, which is why you're agonizing over this instead of just accepting what would solve all your problems." Clara looked up at her cousin. "What would you do?" "Me? I'd marry him in a heartbeat, but I'm practical to a fault, and I've never believed in love conquering all." Margaret's expression softened. "But you're not me, Clara. You still believe that somewhere, somehow, there might be something more than strategic partnerships and practical arrangements." "Do I?" Clara asked quietly. "Because I'm starting to think that believing in love is what got me into this mess in the first place." "Believing in Adrian's love got you into this mess. That doesn't mean all love is a lie." Before Clara could respond, Thomas entered the study with a visitor, one that made Clara's heart sink. The Duke of Moreland, Catherine Pemberton's father, was one of the most powerful men in Parliament and one of Julian's longest-standing political enemies. "Miss Whitmore," Moreland said, his voice carefully neutral. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." "Your Grace," Clara replied, standing to offer a slight curtsy. "This is unexpected." "I'm sure it is, especially given my daughter's recent, unfortunate behavior." Moreland's jaw tightened. "I came to apologize on her behalf and to offer you compensation for the distress she caused." Clara blinked. "I'm sorry?" "My daughter acted abominably. She attempted to commit a serious crime against you and the Duke of Ashcroft, motivated by jealousy and misguided family loyalty." Moreland pulled out a bank draft. "This is a substantial sum, meant to cover any damages to your reputation and to express my family's sincere regret." Clara stared at the draft. It was for more money than her father earned in 3 years. "Your Grace, I don't want your money." "Then what do you want?" It was a genuine question, asked with surprising humility. Clara looked at this powerful man who had raised a daughter to believe that birth mattered more than character, and she made a decision. "I want you to tell me why people like your daughter think they have the right to destroy people like me simply for existing in their world." Moreland was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed and sank into a chair without being invited, suddenly looking very old. "Because we're terrified," he admitted. "We've built our entire world on the premise that bloodline and title matter more than anything else. And then people like you come along, intelligent, accomplished, worthy of respect despite having no aristocratic heritage, and you prove that premise wrong. You prove that everything we've used to justify our privilege is arbitrary and meaningless." He looked at Clara with tired eyes. "My daughter tried to destroy you because your very existence threatens the foundation of her identity. If a merchant's daughter can be just as worthy of a duke's respect as a noblewoman, then what does it mean to be noble? What's the point of all these titles and traditions if they don't actually make us superior?" "There is no point," Clara said quietly. "That's what you're afraid to admit. Birth doesn't make you superior. It just makes you lucky." "Yes, and once enough people realize that, the world my daughter was raised to rule will cease to exist." Moreland stood slowly. "Which is why, Miss Whitmore, I'm not just here to apologize. I'm here to ask you to accept the Duke of Ashcroft's marriage proposal." Clara felt like she'd been slapped. "Excuse me?" "Catherine told me about the contract before she was arrested, and I'm here to tell you that you should accept it." Moreland's voice was sincere. "Not because I want to see you elevated or because I think you need aristocratic validation, but because if someone like you becomes a duchess, if someone who earned respect rather than inherited it joins our ranks, maybe we'll finally be forced to evolve." He moved toward the door, then paused. "The world is changing, Miss Whitmore. People like you are going to reshape it whether we like it or not, and I'd rather be part of that change than crushed by it." After he left, Clara and her father sat in stunned silence.
Well, Thomas finally said. That was illuminating. He's right, though, isn't he? Clara stood, moving to the window. The world is changing. The question is whether I want to be part of changing it from the outside or from within. What does your heart tell you? Clara thought about that question for a long time. What did her heart tell her? A month ago, it had been shattered by betrayal. 2 weeks ago, it had been defended by a duke with questionable motives. Yesterday, it had started to believe in the possibility of something new. And today? Today her heart was telling her something she'd been afraid to acknowledge. That Julian Ashcroft, for all his strategic thinking and political maneuvering, had shown her something Adrian never had. Honest respect for who she was, not who he wanted her to be. That a partnership built on truth might be worth more than a romance built on lies.
That maybe, just maybe, the best way to honor the girl she'd been was to become the woman she was meant to be. My heart tells me to stop asking what I should do and start asking what I want to do, Clara said quietly. And what I want is to stop running from my own power. She turned to her father with sudden clarity. Call in the Blackwood debt, and any other debts owed by families who have treated us with contempt. It's time we stopped subsidizing our own oppression. Thomas smiled slowly. And the Duke's proposal? I'll give him my answer tomorrow, on my terms, in my time. Clara's voice was firm. Because whether I marry him or not, I'm done letting anyone else set the pace of my life. The next morning, Clara sent a message to Julian requesting a meeting at a neutral location, the library at Ashcroft House, but during public visiting hours when other scholars would be present. She wanted witnesses to whatever happened next. Julian was waiting when she arrived, standing among the towering bookshelves with an expression of carefully controlled anxiety. Clara, he said as she approached, have you made a decision? I have, but first I need you to answer a question honestly. Clara met his eyes. If I say no, if I refuse your proposal and walk away from all of this, will you respect that choice? Will you step back and let me build my life without your influence? Julian's jaw clenched. Yes, though it would be one of the hardest things I've ever done. Why? Because somewhere in the past few weeks, you've become essential to me in a way I didn't think was possible. Because I wake up thinking about you and go to sleep wondering if I've done enough to earn your trust. Because for the first time in my life, I've met someone who sees through all my strategies and calculations and still chooses to give me a chance. He paused. But if you need me to walk away, I will. Because your autonomy and happiness matter more than my wants. Clara studied his face, searching for any sign of manipulation. But all she saw was raw honesty and vulnerability from a man who had spent his life hiding both. I'm going to accept your proposal, she said quietly, but with conditions of my own. Relief and surprise warred on Julian's face. Name them. First, this is a genuine partnership. You don't make major decisions about our lives, our estates, or our political alliances without consulting me. My voice carries equal weight. Agreed. Second, we maintain separate bedrooms and personal spaces until such time as we both feel ready to change that arrangement. I won't be pressured into physical intimacy because of a marriage contract. Of course, Clara, I would never— Third, Clara interrupted, her voice harder now. If you ever lie to me again, if you ever manipulate me for strategic gain or treat me like a piece on a chessboard, the partnership ends immediately. I'll leave, take whatever the contract allows me, and you'll never see me again. Are those terms acceptable? Julian held her gaze for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. They're more than acceptable. They're exactly what I hoped you'd demand. Clara shook his hand, feeling the warmth of his palm against hers. Then yes, Your Grace, I'll marry you, not because I need your protection or because I'm in love with you, but because I think together we might actually change something that matters. That's all I could ask for. Julian's smile was genuine and perhaps a little odd. Though I reserve the right to hope that someday you might feel more than strategic appreciation for this partnership. Hope is free, Clara said, but she was smiling too. Just don't expect guarantees. The wedding was planned for 6 weeks later, giving London society just enough time to spiral into complete chaos over the news. The announcement in the Times was characteristically blunt. The Duke of Ashcroft is pleased to announce his engagement to Miss Clara Whitmore, daughter of Thomas Whitmore, merchant. The wedding will be a private ceremony at the Duke's ancestral estate, with a public reception to follow. The reaction was everything Clara had expected and more. Half of aristocratic London was scandalized. The other half was fascinated. And buried in the middle were a surprising number of people who seemed genuinely pleased that someone was finally challenging the rigid social hierarchies that had governed their world for centuries. The Countess of Bedford sent a note of congratulations, along with some surprisingly sage advice about navigating aristocratic politics. Several merchant families reached out to Thomas Whitmore with business propositions, suddenly eager to ally themselves with the family connected to the Duke of Ashcroft. And 3 different newspapers requested interviews with Clara, wanting to understand the woman who had captured one of England's most eligible bachelors. Clara declined the interviews but accepted an invitation to speak at a women's literary society, an organization she'd belonged to before the scandal but had avoided since Adrian's betrayal. Standing before a room full of women who had witnessed her public humiliation and were now watching her improbable ascension, Clara made a choice to be honest. "I'm not here to tell you a fairy tale about love conquering all," she began, "because that's not what happened to me. What happened was that I was betrayed by someone I trusted, humiliated in public, and expected to disappear quietly into shame. And for a while I did exactly that. I hid, I grieved, I let fear dictate my choices." She paused, looking around the room. "But then I realized something. The only power anyone has over you is the power you give them. And I was done giving my power away. So I stopped hiding, I stopped apologizing for existing, and I started demanding the respect I deserved rather than waiting for someone to give it to me." A young woman in the front row raised her hand. "But you're marrying a duke. Doesn't that mean you still needed a man's protection to survive?" "No," Clara said firmly. "It means I made a strategic choice that serves my interests and allows me to effect change from within a system that desperately needs changing. I'm not marrying the Duke of Ashcroft because I need him. I'm marrying him because together we can accomplish things neither of us could alone. That's partnership, not rescue." The questions continued for another hour, and Clara answered each one with the same unflinching honesty. When the event finally ended, several women approached her privately to share their own stories of betrayal, humiliation, and survival. Clara listened to each one, recognizing pieces of her own journey and their struggles. "You're giving them hope," Margaret observed as they left the building. "Whether you intended to or not, you've become a symbol of resistance against a system that's crushed countless women." "I didn't ask to be a symbol," Clara said. "No one ever does. But here you are anyway." Margaret linked her arm through Clara's. "The question is, what are you going to do with that power?" Clara thought about that question all the way home. What would she do with this unexpected influence? How would she use her position as the future Duchess of Ashcroft to help other women who found themselves trapped by social expectations and rigid hierarchies? The answer came to her 3 days before the wedding, as she was reviewing the final details of the ceremony with Julian. "I want to establish a fund," she said suddenly, "for women who need to escape bad marriages or situations where they're being controlled through financial dependence." Julian looked up from the seating arrangements. "Go on." "A discreet fund that provides women with the resources to leave, money for housing, legal fees, travel if necessary. Managed by women for women, with no questions asked about their reasons for leaving." Clara's voice grew more animated as the idea took shape. "We could start with my own inheritance and grow it through donations from others who want to support the cause." "That's brilliant," Julian said quietly, "and potentially revolutionary. You're talking about giving women the economic independence to walk away from situations that society expects them to endure." "Yes, because if I'd had access to something like that, if other women had access to it, then maybe we wouldn't need to rely on strategic marriages or men's goodwill to survive." Clara met his eyes. "Maybe we could actually choose our own paths." Julian was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out his checkbook. "I want to be the first donor, and I want to help you find other supporters who understand what you're trying to do." "You do that? Even though it essentially creates a system that makes marriages like ours unnecessary?" "Clara, I don't want you to marry me because you have no other choice. I want you to marry me because you actively choose to, every single day. If this fund helps other women have that same freedom of choice, then I'll support it with everything I have." It was in that moment, Watching Julian write a substantial check to support a cause that could theoretically undermine his own interests, that Clara felt something shift in her chest. It wasn't love, not yet, and maybe never in the conventional sense, but it was trust, genuine and hard-won, built on actions rather than words. The wedding day arrived with unseasonably perfect weather. Clara stood in her room at Ashcroft Estate, looking at herself in the mirror while her mother fussed with the final details of her dress. It was a beautiful gown, cream silk with delicate embroidery, but Clara had chosen it herself, not allowed Julian or his family to dictate her appearance. "Are you nervous?" Elizabeth asked, adjusting Clara's veil. "No," Clara said, surprising herself with the truth. "I'm certain, which is different from how I felt when I thought I was going to marry Adrian." "Because you're older and wiser now?" "Because I'm choosing this with my eyes open. I know exactly who Julian is, his flaws, his strategic thinking, his past mistakes, and I'm marrying him anyway because I believe we can build something real from this foundation of honesty." Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so proud of you, darling. You've taken something that could have destroyed you and turned it into strength." The ceremony was small and private, held in the chapel on Julian's ancestral estate, with only immediate family and a handful of close friends present. Clara walked down the aisle alone, having declined her father's offer to give her away. "I'm not being given," she'd told him gently. "I'm choosing to go." Julian waited at the altar, resplendent in formal dress, his expression unreadable to anyone who didn't know him well. But Clara could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight uncertainty in his eyes, the fear that even now she might change her mind. When she reached him and took his hands, she saw that uncertainty dissolve into relief and something that looked almost like wonder. The ceremony itself was brief and traditional, but when it came time for the vows, Clara and Julian had written their own. "I promise to be honest with you," Julian said, his voice carrying clearly through the chapel. "Even when the truth is difficult, I promise to respect your autonomy and support your choices, even when they're not what I would choose. And I promise to build a partnership with you based on mutual respect rather than obligation or expectation." Clara's turn. "I promise to trust you until you give me reason not to. I promise to bring my full self to this marriage, my strength, my intelligence, my stubbornness, and my scars. And I promise to work with you to create something better than either of us could build alone." When the priest pronounced them married and Julian leaned in to kiss her, Clara felt a complex tangle of emotions. Hope, caution, determination, and underneath it all, the first fragile shoots of something that might someday become love. The reception that evening was a different affair entirely, a grand event attended by hundreds of people from every level of London's society. Merchant families mingled with aristocrats, creating combinations that would have been unthinkable just months before. And at the center of it all stood Clara and Julian, the unlikely couple who had somehow made this strange alliance work. Clara was in the middle of a conversation with a group of women about the fund she was establishing when she noticed a disturbance near the entrance. The crowd parted and Adrian Locke walked in, sober and impeccably dressed, carrying himself with a quiet dignity she'd never seen before. Julian tensed beside her. "Should I have him removed?" "No," Clara said quietly. "Let me talk to him." She approached Adrian, aware of every eye in the room watching their interaction. Up close, she could see that he'd changed in the weeks since she'd last seen him. He looked healthier, more grounded, and there was a sadness in his eyes that seemed earned rather than performative. "Miss," he caught himself. "Your Grace, I'm sorry for intruding. I know I wasn't invited, but I needed to see you before I left England." "You're really leaving?" "Tomorrow, for Italy, then perhaps Greece. Somewhere far enough away that I can finally stop being the man who destroyed the best thing in his life and start figuring out who else I might be." He paused. "But I wanted to say goodbye properly and to tell you that seeing you here today, married to someone who clearly values you the way you deserve, it gives me hope." "Hope for what?" "That maybe someday I'll find the courage to value someone the way I should have valued you. That maybe my mistakes can at least serve as lessons for the man I'm trying to become." Adrian's smile was bittersweet. "You deserve so much better than me, Clara, and I'm genuinely glad you found it." Clara looked at this man who had once defined her entire concept of love and happiness, and felt only a gentle sort of closure. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Adrian. I really do." "Thank you." He bowed formally. "Goodbye, Your Grace. I truly wish you every happiness." She watched him leave, and with his departure, felt the last chains of her past finally fall away. Adrian Locke no longer had any power over her, not her happiness, not her peace, not her future. He was just a memory, growing fainter with each passing day. Julian appeared at her side. "Are you all right?" "Yes," Clara said, and meant it completely. "I really am." The celebration continued late into the night, but eventually Clara and Julian found themselves alone on a terrace overlooking the estate's gardens, much like that first night at his townhouse when she'd overheard him defending her. "It's strange," Clara mused, leaning against the railing. "A few months ago, my world ended. And now here I am, a duchess, married to a man I barely knew, about to start a life I never imagined." "Do you regret it?" Julian asked quietly. Clara thought about that question honestly. Did she regret the pain of Adrian's betrayal? Yes. Did she regret the humiliation and struggle that had followed? Absolutely. But did she regret the woman she'd become through that fire? "No," she said finally. "Because all of it, the betrayal, the scandal, the fight to rebuild my reputation, all of it taught me something crucial. It taught me that I'm strong enough to survive anything, that I don't need anyone's permission to exist in this world or any world, that I can create my own path rather than follow someone else's expectations. And what path are you creating now? One where women have choices, where birth matters less than character, where partnerships are built on honesty rather than pretty lies." Clara turned to face him. "And maybe, if we're very lucky and work very hard, one where people like us prove that you can build something real from the ashes of what was destroyed." Julian took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle patterns on her palm. "I meant what I said in my vows, Clara. I want to build this partnership with you, not because I need you to validate my status or because you're useful politically, but because you challenge me to be better than I am." "Good," Clara said, "because I have a lot of plans, and most of them are going to be extremely inconvenient for traditional aristocratic sensibilities." Julian's laugh was genuine and warm. "I wouldn't expect anything less." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky, and Clara realized that for the first time in months, she wasn't afraid of the future. She wasn't waiting for another betrayal or bracing for another humiliation. She was simply here, present, ready to face whatever came next with clear eyes and an unguarded heart. The next morning, Clara woke in her separate bedroom at Ashcroft Estate, feeling oddly peaceful. She'd expected to feel anxious or uncertain after the wedding, but instead she felt energized and ready to begin the work they'd discussed. Over breakfast, she and Julian began planning in earnest, not just for their household, but for the Women's Fund and the various social reform initiatives they both wanted to pursue. It was strange and wonderful to have a partner who listened to her ideas seriously, who contributed his own expertise without trying to dominate the conversation, who treated her as an equal rather than a subordinate. 3 weeks into their marriage, Clara received an unexpected visitor. Lady Catherine Pemberton, recently released from custody pending trial, requested a meeting. "You don't have to see her," Julian said. "After what she tried to do—" "I want to," Clara interrupted. "I need to understand why." Catherine looked diminished somehow when she was shown into Clara's private sitting room. The arrogance and venom that had defined their previous interactions were gone, replaced by something that looked almost like humility. "Your Grace," Catherine said, the title clearly difficult for her. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." "What do you want, Catherine?" "To apologize. Sincerely this time, without agenda or strategy." Catherine sat down heavily. "I convinced myself that I was defending my family honor, that I was protecting society from social climbers and manipulators. But the truth is I was just angry and frightened and looking for someone to blame for my own unhappiness. And you chose me. I chose you because you represented everything I was taught to despise. Someone who earned respect rather than inherited it, who refused to stay in their assigned place, who threatened the comfortable hierarchies that made my privilege possible."
Catherine's voice was hollow. "But watching you these past weeks, seeing what you've built with Julian, I've realized something terrible." "What's that?" "That you were never the threat. I was. My assumptions, my prejudices, my desperate clinging to a system that privileges birth over merit. That's what's destroying the world I was raised to protect. And I'm the one who should be ashamed." Clara studied the other woman carefully, looking for signs of manipulation. But all she saw was genuine contrition and a kind of exhausted honesty that came from having nothing left to lose. "I forgive you," Clara said quietly. "Not because you deserve it, but because I'm tired of carrying anger around. I have better things to do with my energy." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm grateful for it nonetheless." She stood to leave, then paused. "One more thing. The women's fund you're establishing, I'd like to contribute to it, anonymously, if possible. Consider it a small attempt at penance for the harm I've caused." After Catherine left, Clara sat alone in her sitting room for a long time, processing the interaction. She had spent so much energy hating Catherine, viewing her as an enemy, an obstacle. But looking at the broken woman who had just left, Clara realized that Catherine had never been the real villain of this story. The real villain was the system that taught women to compete rather than support each other, that valued birth over character, that told people their worth was determined by accidents of ancestry rather than the content of their souls. Catherine had been a product of that system, just as Clara had been a victim of it. And now, as the Duchess of Ashcroft, Clara had the power to start dismantling that system piece by piece. 6 months after the wedding, Clara stood before Parliament alongside Julian and several other reformers, presenting a petition for women's property rights. It was a bold move, one that had many aristocrats fuming about the Duchess of Ashcroft overstepping her bounds. But Clara no longer cared about staying within bounds. She had learned that the only way to change an unjust system was to push against its limits until they broke. "My husband and I have established what we call the partnership marriage contract," Clara told the assembled politicians. "A legal framework that gives married women equal say in household decisions, control over their own inheritances, and the right to independent income. We believe this should be the standard for all marriages, not just ours." The room erupted in arguments and debates, but Clara stood her ground, answering every objection with calm logic and refusing to be intimidated by men who thought her presence in Parliament was itself scandalous. When they finally left the building hours later, Julian squeezed her hand. "You were magnificent." "They're going to fight us every step of the way," Clara said. "Of course they are. Change is never easy, especially for people who benefit from the status quo." Julian smiled. "But we're not going anywhere, and neither are the dozens of women and progressive men who are joining our cause." That evening, Clara wrote in her journal, a habit she'd taken up as a way of processing the extraordinary changes in her life. "A year ago, I thought my life was over because a man I loved betrayed me. I thought losing Adrian meant losing everything that mattered. But I was wrong. So wrong. What I lost was an illusion, the pretty lie that love alone was enough, that romance could conquer all obstacles, that if I just believed hard enough in someone else's promises, they would come true. What I found was something infinitely more valuable, my own strength, the ability to stand alone when necessary, the courage to demand respect rather than beg for acceptance, and eventually, a partnership built on truth rather than fantasy. Julian is not my savior. He never was, despite what the gossip papers say. He's my partner, flawed, strategic, sometimes frustratingly calculating, but honest in ways Adrian never managed to be. We're building something together that's more valuable than romance, a genuine alliance based on mutual respect and shared purpose. And if someday that alliance becomes something more, if the trust we've built slowly transforms into love, then it will be a love worth having, because it will be built on truth rather than illusion. But I'm not waiting for that day. I'm not putting my life on hold for the possibility of romantic fulfillment. I'm too busy changing the world. 1 year after the wedding, Clara and Julian hosted an anniversary celebration that was nothing like the scandalous ball where their relationship had become public. This time, the guest list included merchant families, reformers, artists, scholars, and yes, some aristocrats, but only those who had proven themselves willing to look beyond titles and traditions.
The entertainment featured discussions of social reform alongside dancing, and several women used the occasion to announce their own partnership marriages modeled after Clara and Julian's contract. Late in the evening, Clara found herself on the same terrace where she'd stood with Julian the night of their wedding, looking out at gardens that had become familiar territory over the past year. "Thinking about how far we've come?" Julian asked, joining her. "Thinking about how far we still have to go," Clara corrected. "We've made progress, but there's so much work left to do." "There always will be. That's the nature of trying to change the world." Julian was quiet for a moment. "Clara, I need to tell you something." "What?" "I love you." Clara's breath caught. In the year they'd been married, Julian had never said those words. He'd shown her respect, support, and admiration, but he'd never claimed love. "You don't have to say it back," he continued quickly. "I'm not expecting reciprocation or even acknowledgement. I just needed you to know that somewhere in the past year, while we were building this partnership and fighting for these reforms, I fell completely in love with you." Clara turned to face him fully, studying his expression in the lamplight. "When did you know?" "The day you testified before Parliament. Watching you stand there, refusing to be intimidated by men who thought you had no right to speak, demanding change with such fierce intelligence and courage, I realized that I hadn't just fallen in love with you. I'd fallen in love with the woman you were becoming and the woman you inspired me to be." Clara felt tears prick her eyes, but they weren't sad tears. "I'm not there yet," she said honestly. "I trust you. I respect you. I value what we've built together. But love, I'm still learning how to recognize it without the pretty lies and broken promises that came with it before." "I know," Julian said gently, "and I'm not asking you to rush. I just wanted you to know that when and if you get there, I'll be here, waiting, building, loving you whether you love me back or not." It was exactly the right thing to say. No pressure, no expectations, just patient honesty. 2 years after the wedding, on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday afternoon, Clara realized she was in love with her husband. It wasn't a dramatic realization or a sudden revelation. It was simply the accumulation of 2 years of small moments, Julian consulting her on every decision, supporting her initiatives even when they complicated his own plans, defending her ideas in Parliament, holding her when the work became overwhelming, celebrating her victories as if they were his own. It was the way he'd learned to read her moods without her having to explain them. The way he'd created space for her independence while also making it clear he preferred her company to solitude. The way he'd kept every promise he'd made in his wedding vows, proving through daily actions that some promises were actually worth believing. She told him that evening over dinner, without fanfare or grand gestures. "I love you," she said, in the middle of a conversation about crop rotation strategies for one of their estates. "I don't know exactly when it happened, but somewhere between last year and today, I fell in love with you." Julian went very still, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. "Say that again." "I love you, Julian Ashcroft, not because you saved me or because you're a duke or because society expects it, but because you've proven every single day for 2 years that you meant every promise you made, because you support me without trying to control me, because you've become my partner in every sense of the word." Julian set down his fork carefully, as if he didn't quite trust his hands. "I was prepared to wait forever." "I know. That's one of the reasons I fell." Clara smiled. "You gave me time to heal, space to grow, and freedom to choose. And I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you. Not because I have to, but because I genuinely want to." They married for practical reasons and built their relationship on strategic foundations. But somewhere in the construction, they'd created something neither had expected. A genuine love story, built not on illusion and pretty promises, but on hard-won trust and daily proof that some partnerships could become something more. 5 years after the wedding, Clara stood in the same London townhouse where she'd once read the newspaper announcement of Adrian's engagement and felt her world collapse. But she wasn't the same woman who had sat in that breakfast room, shattered and lost. That woman was a memory, a younger, more naive version of herself who had believed that love alone could conquer all obstacles. The woman Clara had become understood that love was important, but it wasn't enough by itself. Real happiness required trust, honesty, partnership, and the courage to build something authentic rather than just believing in pretty lies. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Julian entering with their daughter, 2 years old, named Elizabeth after Clara's mother, and already showing signs of her mother's stubbornness and her father's strategic thinking. "There you are," Julian said, settling Elizabeth on his hip. "Your mother wants to know if we're still coming to dinner tonight." "Of course. Tell her we wouldn't miss it." Clara took her daughter from Julian, kissing the top of her head. "I was just thinking about how different my life is now from what I thought it would be." "Better or worse?" "Different," Clara said honestly. "I thought I'd marry for love and live happily ever after in a cottage somewhere, away from politics and society. Instead, I married for strategy and ended up changing laws from a ducal estate. With occasional happiness thrown in. With constant happiness earned through work and honesty and refusing to settle for less than I deserve." Clara looked at Julian, this complicated man who had become her partner in every sense. "I wouldn't change any of it. Not the pain that brought us together, not the scandal that forced me to find my strength, not even the broken heart that taught me the difference between love and lies." Julian kissed her gently. "Neither would I. Though I do sometimes wish I could go back and punch Adrian Locke for putting you through that." "Don't," Clara said, surprising herself. "Because if he hadn't broken my heart, I never would have learned how strong I could be. I never would have met you. I never would have started the fund that's now helped hundreds of women escape bad situations. I never would have become the person I was meant to be." She looked down at their daughter, this tiny person who would grow up in a world that was slowly, painfully changing for the better. Besides, the best revenge isn't punching him. It's building a life so full and rich and genuine that his betrayal becomes nothing more than a footnote in my story. As if summoned by the conversation, the butler appeared with the letter. "For your grace, it just arrived from Italy." Clara recognized the handwriting immediately. Adrian. She hadn't heard from him in 3 years, not since he'd sent a brief note announcing he was getting married to an Italian widow with 3 children and had found unexpected happiness in a quiet life far from London's social pressures. This letter was different. It was an invitation to a small gathering Adrian was hosting for old friends, including an acknowledgement that he understood if she preferred not to attend. "I've spent 5 years learning to be the man I should have been when I knew you," he wrote. "I'll never stop regretting the pain I caused, but I wanted you to know that your forgiveness, your grace, in letting me go and move forward, gave me permission to become someone I can actually respect. Thank you for that gift, even though I didn't deserve it." Clara read the letter twice, then showed it to Julian. "What do you think?" "I think that's your decision entirely. Though I'll admit I'm curious to meet the man you once loved, now that he's apparently grown up." Clara thought about it for a long moment. Then she smiled. "Let's go. Not because I need closure or because I'm still invested in his happiness, but because I'm curious to see who he became after all these years. And because I want to introduce him to the woman I became, partly because of his betrayal, partly despite it." The gathering in Italy was small and genuine. Adrian and his wife Maria, a few expatriate friends, and Clara and Julian. Adrian had changed dramatically. He was quieter, more thoughtful, and there was a peace in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Your Grace," he said when they arrived, the formal address coming naturally. "Thank you for coming. I know it can't have been an easy decision." "Actually, it was," Clara said honestly. "Because you're not the man who hurt me anymore, and I'm not the girl who was hurt. We're both different people now." Over dinner that evening, they talked easily about their lives. Adrian's work teaching English to Italian children, Maria's late husband and the love she'd found again with Adrian, the reforms Clara and Julian were pushing through Parliament, and the fun that had become Clara's life's work. "You're changing the world," Adrian said quietly at one point. "The Clara I knew always wanted to make a difference, but I don't think even you imagined this scale." "But the Clara you knew was naive enough to think one person's love could change everything," Clara corrected gently. "The woman I became learned that real change requires partnerships, strategy, and the willingness to fight for what matters." Later, as she and Julian prepared to leave, Adrian pulled Clara aside one last time. "I need to say this," he said. "Thank you for forgiving me. Thank you for letting me go. And thank you for becoming exactly who you were meant to be, even though, especially because, it had nothing to do with me." Clara looked at this man who had once been the center of her world and felt only warmth and distance, the way you might feel about a childhood home you'd long since outgrown. "You're welcome," she said simply. "And Adrian, I hope you're happy, genuinely happy, not just making the best of a bad situation." "I am," he said, and she could see it was true. "For the first time in my life, I'm actually happy with who I am and where I am. It's not the life I planned, but it's real, and that's worth more than any title or fortune." On the journey back to England, Julian found Clara standing at the ship's railing, watching the Italian coast disappear into the distance. "Thinking about what might have been?" he asked. "No," Clara said firmly. "Thinking about what actually is, and what still can be." She turned to face him, this man who had entered her life during her darkest moment and become her greatest ally. "I used to think love meant believing someone when they promised you the world. Now I know it means building a world together, brick by brick, through honesty and partnership and daily choice." "That's a much less romantic definition," Julian observed. "But it's a truer one, and I'll take true over romantic any day." Clara took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "Besides, there's something deeply romantic about choosing someone every single day, even when it would be easier to walk away. That's the love I want. The kind that's earned through action, not just declared through pretty words." Julian pulled her close, and they stood together watching the horizon. Two people who had found each other through scandal and strategy, but had built something far more valuable than either had imagined. Behind them lay a broken engagement, a public betrayal, and a journey through humiliation and pain. Ahead lay a partnership that would change laws, help countless women, and prove that love built on honesty could outlast any romance built on lies. And in the present moment, Clara felt something she never thought possible during those dark days after Adrian's betrayal. Peace. Genuine, hard-won, thoroughly earned peace. The girl who had believed in fairy tales was gone, shattered by betrayal. But the woman who had risen from those ashes, strong, strategic, unafraid to demand what she deserved, that woman was just beginning to understand her own power, and the world would never be the same.